Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.
Hey, it's Matt from the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur here. Thanks again for listening to the DTVC podcast. Before we jump in, I wanted to quickly let you know that my new novel, A Girl and a Gun, is available on Amazon now, both on Kindle and paperback. It follows Justin, a successful writer whose past as a scriptwriter for a fetish porn site comes back to haunt him and threatens to derail his career. As he's picking up the pieces, he gets an opportunity to make a movie called A Girl and a Gun with a rom-com star. Justin may have bitten off more than he can chew, though, because she's notoriously difficult to work with. If you're interested, you can find the link on our webpage, along with the link to my first novel, Chad in Accounting. If you have any questions, please reach out, and I thank you for the support. Now, on to the podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and I am joined once again by screenwriter Tom Jolliffe. Did I get the pronunciation right this time?
Yeah, that's good for me.
Or Jolliffe,
close,
right?
Close
Jolliffe.
enough. Yeah. Jolliffe, yeah.
Jolliffe, there we go. Okay, that's better. But he is the screenwriter of a current film that's out right now on well, it's as we're doing the recording, it's available to rent on Prime, and also you can buy a hard copy of it. It's When Darkness Falls. We think by the time this episode airs, though, that you might have more streaming options for it.
Yeah, so I think we should have Hulu, and then beginning of September we're looking at Tubi and Peacock.
Excellent. And then this is just for the United States, right? The UK will be coming later.
Yeah, so just US at the moment, and then we're just sorting out other territories as we speak. So yeah, hopefully a few more before the end of the year, and maybe the UK. So we'll see.
Perfect. Yeah, and if anybody wants more information about that, if you go back in the archives, I can't remember exactly what number episode it was that we did, but it was only a few episodes ago from this one. You can go back and see that we talked about the film in much more detail, and then of course there was a blog post on it as well. So if you need more information, go there. But definitely a film everybody should be checking out once it's available in your territory. And on top of that, Tom, you also write for Flickering Myth, and I know I think you had 2 articles posted today of the day we're recording this. I think by the time this episode airs, you'll probably have a bunch of other ones between now and then.
Yeah, I can imagine so. I think I tend to do between sort of 2 and 3 a week, so I never quite know when they're going to go up. So yeah, it'll there should be quite a few up between now and then.
Yeah, the one that you had, so it's a couple of days ago. The one that that really caught my eye was an article that you did about 90s comic book adaptations, which I think is a fascinating read in the current movie and TV environment.
Yeah, it kind of struck me that I was sort of looking back over a couple of films around the time just before I wrote it, including Barbed Wire, and then I just started thinking about how many of these kind of films that were being made at the time. Before everyone was sort of, firing them out, trying to make something stick, and very few of them kind of worked. But it was an interesting time with lots of interesting characters, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, one of my kind of favorites, which I've read, I think Lori Petty does not like that she was in the movie or something like that. I've heard of people that aren't big fans, but Tank Girl was one that really fascinated. I mean, I don't know, I kind
Yeah,
of dug that one. I mean, it had Iggy Pop and Ice-T and all kinds of, Malcolm McDowell and all that. But it's a very I think movies like that would still maybe get adapted nowadays, but it does feel like there'd be maybe a little bit of a fear around a Tank Girl. Like they want something that could create a franchise or something that can
yeah.
move, pull a lot of, Tank Girl would probably be used for like a mini series or something like that now.
I think yes, certainly so. I think that's one of those films that kind of, I mean, well, pardon the pun, but it tanked when it came out. Uh, but it's kind of grown in time. I think there's been a bit more appreciation, but I think it was almost slightly ahead of its time, I guess. I think people are kind of a bit more into that quirky style. You can see that it's sort of quite heavily influenced Birds of Prey, I think. So yeah, it's a bit more in vogue now, that kind of film.
Yeah, that's a good point because I think Birds of Prey for me was a real interesting one. I mean, I like Ewan McGregor, but I thought the villain he was playing was that character was a little bit interesting. I think he's kind of like in terms of Batman baddies go, he's like way down the list of baddies. But yeah, it was, I think, the way that they kind of, at a time when Hollywood was still not sure what to do with female led comic book movies. It seems like in the 90s they were much more willing to take those kinds of chances on that kind of thing, but only if there were these quirky projects, right? It wasn't like
Yeah,
they still didn't touch Wonder Woman, they still didn't touch some of those big names, but Barbed Wire, Tank Girl, that they were fine doing one of those.
yeah. I guess maybe it was something to do with the cost. Maybe all the Marvel and DC kind of things to get the rights to do the movie might have cost a bit more. So they probably took gambles on, more obscure stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating too when you look at like what Marvel, you know, are, they were kind of starting to transition into being what we understand Marvel to be, but then it was kind of also kind of a hiccup too, right? Because it was like the early 2000s that Marvel was making movies, but they were all still the standalone kind of things, and they had like they're kind of varying degrees of quality. Like I think I know Daredevil's one that people pan quite a bit, and then of course they made the Elektra sequel off of it, and so it was like, but I think in the 90s I think you start to get like Blade, and there's a sense that like, okay, we can use some of these comic book franchises to make movies, that the technology might be there or something like that, and then it sort of goes and then it fades away, and then you get Iron Man. I guess what was that, like 08, 09, something like that, where
Yeah,
there's suddenly a concept of like, oh, what if we put them all together and make them these interwoven things, and put a huge budget behind them and all of that, and it changed the whole thing for us.
yeah, definitely. I think it was a unique idea, and I think it's quite a gamble really, because you've got to rely on audiences kind of coming to this one and then that one, and some of the films you'll go in and then they'll be referencing things that you might not have seen in a film before, but they're kind of catering to the audience. I think that's going to be seeing pretty much all of them. So, if someone's referencing, two or three films back on a different character, they'll kind of get the reference, I think.
Yeah. So it's funny because I haven't really been keeping up with much of the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff, but I remember when the buzz was out that Kingpin was in the Hawkeye TV series, and I had seen the Daredevil TV show, and that was on Netflix, and so yeah, it's like the idea that, like, for somebody who was just watching the movies and just sort of thinking the movies were great and that was doing enough for them, and maybe they were sort of dipping their toe in the TV shows, they find out that here's this character who was in seasons 1 and 3 of a full sort of, 3-season run of Daredevil, that they and of course Disney Plus ended up picking those series back up from Netflix. But yeah, that idea that suddenly, like, oh, do I need to go back and watch a TV show that I probably didn't watch before?
Yeah, I think for me, I think Black Widow I was watching, and they were referring back, to stuff that was happening in, I think, Iron Man 2 or something,
Yeah.
as far back as that. And I was a bit lost on the kind of references. So yeah, sometimes it can go a bit too far, but yeah, generally I think it's worked quite well for them to link everything together.
Yeah, and I think that was like one of the things that I think with comic book movies that made them maybe not work as well initially, that Marvel Cinematic Universe tapped into, that I think did work, was that in the comic books the characters were somewhat connected. That was interesting because in the comic books they would have their own storyline. So like if Spider-Man showed up in Daredevil, it didn't necessarily affect whatever was going on in Amazing Spider-Man or Spectacular Spider-Man or something like that. It was just him appearing in Daredevil, but it was just the fact that they could all appear together, that you could see them all together. And in these the way that theatrical movies were done in the 90s, I think kind of really 80s, 90s, into the early 2000s, was that Marvel didn't like to give out a lot of their characters at once. I think that was like the big thing with the Fantastic Four movie, that you could have the Fantastic Four and Doctor Doom, but you couldn't have anybody else. That was it for that movie.
Yeah.
You couldn't use anybody. And it did lead to some interesting things because, of course, with the rights agreements where Fantastic Four and X-Men went to Fox, and included in Fantastic Four was Silver Surfer. So then when they decided to do the Infinity War saga, they hadn't gotten the rights back. They hadn't, I guess, Disney hadn't bought out Fox yet to get those characters back. But then, so you're doing that movie without Silver Surfer because he's included in this other deal. Or Sony had to lend Spider-Man to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or they almost got to, I guess, collaborate together on it so that Sony can be included in that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's very complicated, I guess, behind the scenes. And then obviously at the moment, Spider-Man's in a whole kind of other issue, sort of being kind of halfway between Sony and Disney. So that's going to be quite interesting to see what they do there.
Yeah, and I think that was like, in the 90s, it was much more common that all of them were siloed. That, the Punisher movie with Dolph, it's like, yeah, there wasn't going to be Spider-Man showing up, even though he, had his origin in Spider-Man. And then when they make the Thomas Jane movie, same thing. He doesn't appear. And then we get the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They introduce him there in Daredevil with Elektra in there. And it just has a kind of a different kind of energy when he's introduced with somebody else or in somebody else's movie, as opposed to just being his own thing, and he doesn't exist with anybody else, and he's just doing Punisher stuff in this one, sort of siloed universe.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if it kind of carries on that way, or whether that trend will sort of burn out a little bit. But yeah, we'll see. I guess it's a kind of an interesting phase coming forward. With Marvel.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, with Marvel, the next phase is going to be quite interesting because I think there's been a little bit of an underwhelming feel, I guess, with the latest one, off the back of Endgame and Infinity War. So they kind of need to sort of be getting up a level with the spectacle and everything. So it'll be quite interesting to see what they do to kind of keep fans on side.
Yeah, I think from an investment standpoint, it was a lot easier before the TV shows. And I think before with the TV shows, with like the ones that they did on Netflix, where you had Daredevil, Punisher, I think Iron Fist, and what else was there? Luke Cage. Jessica Jones. Those were all their own little thing, kind of self-contained within themselves, and you didn't have to watch a bunch of other things to know what was happening. You could just watch those shows, and they also came out at a pace that made it easier to follow them. I think it was like almost like one of them would come out a year or something like that, or every other year or something. So it wasn't like you were getting something like it feels like with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they're pumping out something like every 3 or 4 months. There's a new TV series to watch or something like that, and I think that might be where the fatigue starts to come in. And it was something that I think Netflix is realizing now, even though Netflix is probably dying out because having trouble because they're losing content, but also they would make these TV series that were like 13-hour movies that would just you'd get the fatigue in them. And I think that's kind of what Marvel is doing, what Disney's doing with these. So it'll be interesting to see. I thought The Mandalorian was a very easily bingeable one because the episodes were only like a half hour of a piece, and I think that kind of helped for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. But I mean, even, I think at the moment Star Wars and Marvel are getting a bit oversaturated. Um, so I mean, Disney's doing quite well at the moment. They're now the number one streamer, aren't they? So they're
Yeah.
doing something right. But it's just whether they can keep just pumping stuff out and maintain their audience.
Yeah, and not push it, right? Because yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't realize. I guess the She-Hulk show is only about a half hour an episode too, or like a little bit more than that. So I guess it in that sense it's not so bad. I know on the Netflix show the episodes were like a little over an hour a piece, but yeah, I think that's the key, is that it was a lot easier when it was like what 3 or 4 movies a year total. And then of course, Disney's mindset with putting out those movies every year was, well, we need to hit like certain spots of the year. So we're going to put out this one in the summer, this one around Christmas, maybe this one in sort of the spring or new, so like because of that strategic need to like make the most money and put them out at certain times, they were trying to saturate the market. But now I guess there's a fear of like, well, if we don't keep pumping out content for this Disney Plus thing, people aren't going to want to subscribe to it.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're all competing with each other. I think Disney's probably got a sensible idea, because I think most of their Marvel and Star Wars things tend to be short form, don't they? So they're about 30, 40 minutes. So yeah, they're quick and easy to watch, really.
Yeah, I think that's something that is something I miss a little bit myself, is that I think with like The Sopranos and The Wire and other shows on HBO, there's a move towards TV episodes being longer. That obviously with HBO, there's no restriction there on how long the episode is. It can be over an hour if it wants. It can be whatever it wants to be. And so there were some Sopranos episodes that were a little over an hour that do feel like more of an investment. And I think that was what was happening with Netflix series. I think all of the Marvel shows that were on Netflix, the kind of those Defenders shows, a lot of the episodes were over an hour, and it could be a little bit of a drain. Which I think, like The Mandalorian, I think I cruised through those seasons pretty quickly because that half-hour piece, and it's also very easy to say I can watch another one for a half hour for sure.
Yeah, well, I think that's it, really. And even if they've got 1 or 2 episodes here and there that are a little bit filler, it's only like half an hour, so you're almost on to the next one. I think with Netflix, some of their stuff, because that it goes on from maybe an hour, sometimes just over. There's a danger that they're weighting down too much into these episodes, and they're getting a little bit overstuffed. Sometimes it's filler where you can see they've spread it out too thin, really. Yeah, so I mean that's happened with a few of their shows, and then if you lose the audience, that's a difficult thing to get back.
Yeah, and you make a great point, because I was talking with Mitch Level from the Video Vacuum. He was on. We were talking about the movie Pig, with the Nicolas Cage movie that got a lot of buzz in a year or two ago. And one of the things I read about that movie is that the original running time for that was 2 hours and 21 minutes. And they cut it down to like about an hour and a half, which feels like the perfect length for that movie. And I do wonder if one of the things with Netflix, it seems like when I go through Netflix and I'm paging through the movies there, a lot of them are in that sort of 2 hour 10 minutes, 2 hours whatever, 2 hours 20 minutes. And I do wonder if that's something where, and I don't know if this is something for you as a screenwriter, if you write a film and either if you're told in advance it needs to be this many pages, or if you write it and it's like, okay, well, no, this needs to be trimmed down. If, whoever's distributing or something says this can't be that long, because that's what happened with Pig, was that somebody said, we can't do anything with this at this length. You've got to cut it. But with Netflix, maybe they don't have that governor on there. But I don't know, if that's something that you experience as a writer.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly something I've experienced with certainly indie horror and indie action. Pretty much every project I do on a commission is, they say you need to hit around about 85, 90 pages to get a 90-minute movie. So that's kind of what I'm working to. But yeah, I have noticed on Netflix and things that there's a lot of movies that are kind of 2 hours, 2 hours 10. But they're kind of getting these directors in that they're kind of given, free reign to some extent, and it's on the platform already, so it's not like they're having to impress, distributors here, there, and everywhere. So they almost indulge a little bit. I feel like, certainly, like if you look at Martin Scorsese doing 4 hours of The Irishman, that's a bit. I mean, I liked the film, but it was a bit indulgent for me to be that length.
Yeah, I completely agree there. It's interesting because you take a movie like Goodfellas that's like, I think it was like 2 hours and 20 minutes long, or something like that, but it doesn't feel like there was a wasted moment in that 2 hours and 20 minutes, 2 hours and a half. Whereas, yeah, like The Irishman, it's like, I mean, it was definitely one. I think I did it in 2 parts because it was such an investment, and,
Yeah.
and it is that idea. I mean, I don't think a distributor would have let. I mean, that's part of the reason why probably why he went to Netflix, was that he had the idea for this movie, and distributors were like, what are we going to do with this? We can't put this in the theater at this length. And I mean, I know it did screen on theaters here because I think Netflix wanted to have the prestige of it possibly being nominated for Oscars, so they did screen it on theaters in the United States and probably across the world. But I do wonder, and it is one of those things where I think from Scorsese's standpoint, he would think, well, I'm an artist, I'm an auteur, like I shouldn't have a distributor telling me how long my movie should be. But there is a sense maybe too from an entertainment standpoint, right, that you've got to sort of trim these things down a bit.
Yeah, certainly, and I think sometimes it's also down to cost. So particularly with the budgets I'm working in, the shorter the movie, the less shooting schedule you need, and then less days you use, the less cost it's going to be. So that tends to be why I'm doing sort of things around the 90-minute mark. But I don't think they're pumping so much money into things at the moment, Netflix, that they're maybe not so worried about saving too much money. They've got quite a lot of films that are costing $100 million plus.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point too, right? That, like, yeah, if you don't have to, if you can get it shot in like a week, or if it needs to be shot within a week, making it quicker too. And I remember I talked with somebody who I can't remember the name of his movie. I think it was like the Coven. He's an indie filmmaker in England who he'd made this film. He sort of wrote and directed it, and the movie itself came out to about 105 minutes. And one of the things he mentioned about that was he was still kind of learning the ability to sort of do sort of the 1 minute per page approach to it. And I wonder, like, even with that kind of thing, if like the movie, if this distributor, if the director kind of takes your script and makes it a little bit longer, if the distributor's like, well, we need to cut something out of here somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine so. Distributors tend to, it's rarely the other way around when they want more put in. So it's usually they want things cut out. But yeah, I guess it's different for every kind of production and every sort of studio. And Netflix have kind of got their own way of doing things as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, I think, maybe sort of how all of this plays out, because it is, with each of these different streaming services, how they all have a sort of unique thing. And I guess probably too in England it's probably a little bit different than it is in the United States with some of the machinations. Like we have the Peacock network is free, or it's included if you have cable through the Comcast company. So, for example, here in Philadelphia, Comcast pretty much owns Philadelphia, so they're everywhere. So of course we get our cable TV through Peacock, and then Peacock is included. And then also what's included with Peacock, if you subscribe, or if you have it included in your cable subscription, is all the English Premier League games. So I think there's only like maybe 1 or 2 a week that are not included in Peacock, at least for live viewing. So in America, anybody here who's a fan of a Premier League team and they want to watch their team every week, that's like an added incentive. Or the Paramount Plus network, they have all the rights to the Serie A. So anybody who has a Serie A team that they follow, they'll pay the extra for Paramount Plus. And then of course I think Showtime can be bundled with Paramount Plus, and so all of them have that. I think Disney, for example, they pair up with ESPN Plus, which for me is big because ESPN Plus has all the NHL hockey games, but they also have like, La Liga and the English Championship division. So that the second tier there. So it's interesting too, like how Netflix is they're kind of out on all of those kinds of things because they don't right now at the moment have any sort of connection to any of those other areas like sports leagues or things like that.
Yeah, I guess that's probably, part of the reason why their business model is starting to kind of go downhill slightly, because I'm pretty sure they've consistently been operating on a loss as well. And yeah, they seem to be losing subscribers.
Yeah, because I mean, I think a lot of the things that they wanted, like a lot of it is their own content now, because a lot of what I think they want to be able to show, these other streaming services have pulled it. But then, I mean the other like a Major League Baseball here in the United States, Apple TV has a game that they air every Friday. Peacock has one that they air every Sunday morning. So that's another piece of it. I think YouTube airs Major League Baseball games, and so I think a lot of these sports leagues are teaming up. I think the NFL, of course, the biggest one here in the U.S. Like they've teamed up with Amazon to air games on Amazon Prime. So yeah, so it's like Netflix. And I don't know if Netflix has ever considered. I mean, the one that Netflix did have a lot of success was they had I think it was like a documentary series that was airing at the same time as the Formula One season, and that did do a lot of business to pull people into watching Formula One here in the United States, because in the United States, Formula One has never really been as popular, I think, as it is in Europe.
Yeah,
yeah. That was one area where they've been able to capitalize a little bit, but they don't have any live sports, and I think that's a big piece for in the United States, and probably I imagine probably in England it's a little bit different with what leagues are aired or anything like that, but because so many of these networks have they're sort of parent networks that have deals with the major sports leagues, they're able to air content that gives them an advantage over Netflix, beyond the fact that Netflix they're also taking their content back from Netflix.
Yeah, I think it's all quite interesting, and I think it'll be interesting to see what these companies do going forward and how they kind of evolve.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating thing to think about, right, from our standpoint, because I know we're going to be talking about Cynthia Rothrock here in a bit. We're going to be talking about two films from the one from the late 80s, one from the early 90s that were like absolute video store gems that people would just I can remember renting them from the video store at that time. And it's amazing how we've seen this market shift so much in our lifetimes, where the VHS was revolutionary, came out in the late 70s, but when it was sort of democratized in the 80s, where VCRs or VTRs were cheaper and easier to get. And then you had the sort of that shift from that to DVD, and now we're seeing this streaming thing that's not only revolutionized how we watch movies, but also TV shows and how we interact with TV as well. And we're seeing that all happen in the span of like maybe 30 years, and like you said, we don't really know where it's going to go from here, because it's already gone in so many different directions that we didn't expect.
Yeah, I think certainly it's an interesting one, and it's one of those I've never quite understood exactly how you quantify success, and what is important to studios like Netflix. I mean, back in the video store days, you would know how well you did by how many tapes you rented out, basically. So it's difficult. How do you kind of quantify what is a success, and how do you know which films are the ones that are pulling in new subscribers and things like that? So it's interesting, but obviously they have their way of working out what is valuable and what isn't.
Yeah, and Netflix, from what I think what we were reading, like with things like was it Bird Box? Was that the one that had like the huge buzz around it? With Sandra Bullock. Like, one of the things I've been reading about with them is that what they publish as success doesn't always equate to what they see as success, because sometimes they want to generate buzz around something or make something seem more successful than it is to get more people on board with it or make them seem like they're doing better when, I mean, I think with sometimes with ones like Bird Box, they count, somebody who maybe fell asleep while watching and started in on the next one.
Yeah.
And it's like, how much of it counts as an actual stream? Is it watching half the movie? Is it the whole movie? Is it the opening 15 minutes? And like you said, right, like what do they consider to be success? If every Bird Box has 1,000,000 15-minute views, is that considered something? And it's like, I think maybe from them, in terms of them outwardly telling us what's successful, that might be a rubric that they might use to be like, oh yeah, Bird Box had however many million views, but maybe a large percentage of them were just like people falling asleep and having the first 15 minutes before they turn it off. And yeah, like what they consider success and then what they tell us is success is another piece of it, where before it was very obvious. It was like, okay, the Nielsen ratings box, or like you said, the video store, the person who owns the video store knows, like, okay, I pulled in the Cynthia Rothrock movie, China O'Brien, and I have trouble keeping it on the shelves. I'm going to buy another copy of it. It's that popular. And the next time another Cynthia Rothrock movie comes across in the catalog, I'm going to pick that up right away because it seems like those really sell. And it's kind of a very easy marker of success, I guess.
Yeah, and in terms of producing the movies and making them, getting them distributed, it was a lot simpler, really. You'd know that if you've shifted, if you've made $20 million worldwide on a tape, that you're going to make something else with the same star, and it's going to be, they would put a reasonable amount of money into it. I think with the streaming thing, the only negative really is that the sort of payouts and buyouts aren't really that high comparatively, to what they used to be. Which obviously that drives the budgets down, which drives the shooting schedules. So I mean, there's negatives, but I guess it's that massive surge of content that people are trying to keep up with, and then films are they are cheaper generally in the indie world, but it's also easier than it's ever been to make movies as well.
Yeah, and kind of dovetailing on that, I know some of the films that you were commissioned to write screenplays for are on Tubi here in the U.S. And I think that model is very different because it's like, the distributor is sort of gambling that enough people are going to want to watch it for free, that whatever the ad rate is that they get, whatever percentage of the ads they get will cover it. And will the name be enough to get people in to watch it? And then I guess that's another thing too, right, is that from the distributor standpoint, how much ad revenue makes it successful before they pull it from something like Tubi and just say, okay, we'll just keep it on Prime and have people pay, $3 or $4 or something to rent it.
Yes, certainly. And I know from an indie perspective at the moment, AVOD, so things like Tubi, that seems to be the big thing at the moment, where films are making their money. More so than I think, transactional, because it's quite difficult, particularly if you're a very low budget film or if you haven't got a name, to kind of persuade someone to pay, $2.99 for a rental. Whereas, Tubi, people generally they'll give you that first 5-10 minutes, and then if you can manage to hook them in, then you've got them for the whole film, and then you're making a little bit more that way.
Yeah, I know. I talked with a director who he kind of transitioned into mostly doing documentaries. His name's Jay Horton, but he was talking about that kind of that idea of like when he first releases the documentary, he puts it on Prime and just collects the streaming numbers or whatever. And I think he started using Tubi as well. And then he was saying like, okay, if it hits a certain point where it's not getting the free streams, then he'll move it to Prime, because if he just gets one rental, it'll be worth more than the minuscule amount of streams he might be getting at that point.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things where you have to kind of be on top of it, and Jay Horton definitely knows what he's doing in that regard. Yeah,
I follow, because so I kind of know him because he reached out to me early, kind of in my I think it was in the late 2000s, maybe early 2010s, with a movie he was doing called Monsters in the Woods. And I remember I kind of liked the movie, but then I think I made a comment because I was listening to the audio commentary, and somebody that was on the film with him was joking about how Glenn Plummer was in the movie for like 5 minutes, and he was joking like, "Oh yeah, you got to get these stars in for like 5 minutes and then splash them all over the cover." And I was kind of annoyed because I'd been hit by too many bait and switches in my time with, with big name actors or something. But I remember he had me watch a couple others of his movies, and he's had an interesting track record because he did a movie called Trap that was kind of his own real indie film that I really enjoyed. But then I think he did another one called it was called Deceitful, something like that, where it was like a company had a property that was like, I think they were going to use it for a telenovela originally, and then they wanted it to be like a Latin American drama, and then they decided to make it an urban drama, and that's when they called him in. So it had gone through like 3 or 4 rewrites already, and then he had a buddy that he worked with who like helped kind of make another rewrite, and it's interesting because, without talking to him about it, you wouldn't know by watching the movie that it had that kind of Frankenstein history to it. But then you find out from him like, okay, well so there are some moments that are a little bit more inspired where he tries to put his stamp on it, or he tries to make the best of the situation. But it is one of those things where sometimes when you get something on a Tubi or something like that, you don't always know what the history of it was.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're just going by a thumbnail and maybe the plot synopsis. It's interesting, and I've seen it since I've been writing the movies myself and kind of seen the evolution in my scripts and then the evolution to screen. I've kind of seen that process, and it can be quite interesting, and they can be very Frankensteinian.
Yeah, I imagine that must be. Yeah, I know we've talked about this when you were on last time too, about how you kind of like I mean, what was it the Amityville, the Witches of Amityville, was that the one, or where you had originally it was going to be 2 couples and then they changed it to just 4 women?
Oh, I think that was Van Helsing.
Van Helsing one.
Yeah. Amityville Witches was one where the whole Amityville aspect of it was kind of added in somewhere down the line in production, in the development process, because the distributor suddenly thought, well, let's get in on this kind of Amityville thing, because there's so many Amityville titled films at the moment. So that was kind of an afterthought, really. It was set somewhere else entirely to begin with.
Yeah, and I think you have another one that came out this year, Jurassic Island. Kind of was that kind of a similar thing, or was that one where they were like, no, we want you to write a dinosaur island movie?
Yeah, I mean, it was that from the beginning, but then there was a few plot points that they kind of changed around, or that there was a thing with like wormholes and things that I had originally. So it's a bit more kind of complex. But the distributors kind of wanted it simplified, and then originally I was going to have them arrive on the island by a big ship or a boat, and then I had to rewrite that because they couldn't get a ship. Then I handed off the script, and then later on somehow or other a ship became available, so someone else rewrote the beginning to have a ship again, and it's just that kind of thing. Pretty much every movie, really.
Yeah, so you kind of you submit what you have, and then and is it something too? Do they tell you when it's coming out, or is it one of those things where you just sort of like, oh, okay, there, it's available? Oh, this was my movie that I wrote that's on here.
Well, like Van Helsing, I think last time I spoke to you, you said, oh, it's on Tubi.
Yeah.
And I had no idea, and then I mentioned it to the producers and director, and they had no idea either. So some distributors are probably better than others at kind of keeping you updated and keeping the filmmakers up in the loop, as it were. But sometimes these things just pop up somewhere, or they'll pop up on a YouTube channel without anyone knowing, which is difficult, because then it doesn't give you much of a chance to do your part in terms of marketing it, or trying to get people to watch it.
And when you say it comes up on the YouTube channel, do you mean like somebody like got a copy of it and uploaded it on there, or that like the distributors put it?
I mean, occasionally they do get pirated and put on YouTube, and it's a difficult process unless you're going to pay your companies to kind of get them off the channel. But there are distribution channels as well now on YouTube. So there's one called V Horror that kind of takes films on, and it's usually just a small kind of exclusive window. So they might do it for a month or two, then it gets pulled, and then it gets distributed via Amazon. Then it might get a physical release. So they kind of do it in stages now. And like Jay Horton said, sometimes it's a case of, right, I'm going to do transactional, and then I'm going to try AVOD, and then if AVOD's not working, I'll go back to transactional. I think it's just the case of getting as much of an impact as you can, really, and sometimes spacing it out can help.
Yeah, and if a movie, like, let's say the movie was pirated, let's say like Jurassic Island, that's on Tubi now, or Wrath of Van Helsing, if they end up on YouTube illegally like that, does that affect sort of the commission that you got for the film, or is it more like other people who's sort of maybe in their contract they were supposed to get some of that revenue?
I mean, I think it'll affect the distributors more than anyone else, really. It's difficult. It's just piracy affects everyone. It's a hard thing. I think that's one thing about AVOD, is that people will go to the official source because they can watch it for free. So that is one advantage, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, one of the rule that I try to follow with the with YouTube is that if the movie is newer and it's available either on AVOD or even just to rent, right? Like if it's like a movie like I don't know, like The Gardener with Gary Daniels or something like that, that's like but even like something that's not quite as new, but it's available to rent on one of the streaming services, I'll go there first. And then if it's an older movie and it's not available anywhere else and somebody's put it on YouTube, then it's like, okay, yes, I'll go to YouTube to see it. But I think that's part of the thing, right? Is that when it's, I think the other thing too with that Tubi and those places offer that's better is that they're going to offer a better quality print too than somebody who's just ripped it and put it on YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, for the most part, they're put on with a level of care, and they've gone through QC. So I mean that's it. I think even sometimes people will put something on YouTube illegally, and they'll still put it through with adverts on, so they're trying to make money as well. Yeah, it's difficult, but we've had to adapt to it and deal with it, really.
Yeah, and I think maybe this might be a good segue too into talking about Cynthia Rothrock, because I think the movie that the first of the two movies we're going to be talking about, China O'Brien, shockingly isn't available on any of the streaming sites, but also there isn't like a high quality Blu-ray available of it. I think maybe in the UK there's a DVD for UK region, but I don't think there's even a USA region 1 DVD available for it.
No, it's difficult with a lot of these early 90s kind of video films, that some of them, there's been, companies that are long dead. So that makes, rights a whole kind of very complicated issue. When you're trying to get prints, or you're trying to, put something out on a DVD or a Blu-ray. So, I mean, Cynthia Rothrock doesn't have many Blu-ray releases, which is a shame, really. A few more in recent times, actually, which is good. But it's difficult. Sometimes your only option is to see a VHS rip on YouTube.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like you were talking about, like I think the Tiger Claws movies are the ones that were recently put. I think was it Vinegar Syndrome that did the Tiger Claws movies, or Arrow? I can't remember.
It might have been Vinegar Syndrome, and they've done another one called Righting Wrongs. So,
yes,
yeah, and there's been one or two other Cynthia films that have had a decent kind of HD transfer. So hopefully that'll be more common.
Yeah, because I think the two that we're going to be talking about here are such that I think given some of the films that do currently have Blu-ray releases on, like maybe like MVD site or Arrow or even some of the Vinegar Syndrome was like some of the ones that they've put out. You think like, okay, well, how is China O'Brien being left out of this, or Lady Dragon? I think Rage and Honor do have DVD, like they're not like Blu-ray DVD releases, but I think they do have they at least have DVD releases here in the States.
Yeah, I can imagine. So the other problem is even with DVDs now, a lot of these films would have been very early DVD releases probably, and a lot are out of print. So even if I could maybe look on eBay for a China O'Brien DVD, it's going to cost a lot of money because the price is going to be pitched up quite high.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what I saw it listed as. Because I think, of course, in the United States, I think it was like $25 for that, the Region 2 DVD. And then, I know I had to buy it on VHS when I reviewed it for the blog. I'm pretty sure. I think that's what I did. I think I've got a VHS copy of this somewhere kicking around. And so I don't know what I did with it, but yeah, just looking at the images here. Yeah, so that's what it was Netflix originally said that they had it on DVD, and it was like in this like very long wait category. So there must have been a DVD at some point that went out of print, but I think I was like scouring Amazon for like months, just like waiting for the time to come when it was cheap enough, and I was able to find a copy that was good enough. And at that time I had the ability with my computer. I had a program and a plugin that allowed me to hook my VCR up to the computer so I could get images directly from the VHSs.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so I think it would be nice if they, I think, especially for collectors out there, I think there are a lot of people that would, I think there are enough people that would buy a China O'Brien Blu-ray that it would, I think that it would be worth it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you look at it, you've got the sequel as well, and then you've got Lady Dragon as a sequel. So there's always that option that you can do a double set.
Yeah, that's a good point too. That a lot of hers are, because I think that's what they did with Tiger Claws, right? That they put all three of them together.
Yeah, so I can imagine that they've probably, with sets like that, they probably decide just to do it as a threesome really, rather than doing them individually.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that would be, I think $30 or $40 US. I mean, it's a good amount of money, but I think it might be accurately priced for the market of people that like to buy and collect these movies. I think, pairing them both together, putting them both together. I mean, maybe that's part of it. Maybe they're just waiting to kind of get their hands on both of them, or maybe there is a plan in mind to eventually do these movies.
Yeah, I would hope so. I think there's definitely a market there, and I know that physical media in parts of Europe, like Germany in particular, has always been quite a good place for physical media. If there's anything I've ever kind of needed that's been lacking elsewhere, or that I can't get in the UK, it tends to pop up on Blu-ray in Germany. So even some of my own films, they've only really got Blu-ray releases in Germany, whereas every other territory is usually just DVD.
Yeah, or and streaming's probably like a big part of it too. That now, and I get that too. Like I think that's one of the things I know for me. My wife and I, we don't do a lot of physical media, but I think sometimes with those collectors versions, it's like, okay, let's do it. Or like in your case with When Darkness Falls as an indie movie, I think that's I always kind of suggest that to people, like if you've got the money, sometimes that's a good purchase just because you're supporting indie that way. But I think too, like with a company like Vinegar Syndrome, to be like, okay, yeah, if you put out these two China O'Brien movies in a Blu-ray and people buy it, if it gets sold out, then I mean, I think like Action USA was one that did sell out when they first released it on Vinegar Syndrome. And I think maybe that proved to them that like, yeah, the market's there for people to want to buy those movies.
Yeah, definitely. That's it, really. You kind of do a limited run, and then you can, if needs be, you can just make on demand after that.
Yeah, which it's another great part of the current like industry, is that you have that sort of on-demand part of it where you don't have to feel like you're left with a bunch of stock. I think that's how Amazon's model works with me self-publishing my novels, is that they don't have to charge me anything to self-publish my novels. They just, whenever somebody wants to buy the hard copy of it, they just produce it at that time, take a cut for how much the paper and shipping cost, and then that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. And I think also with these kind of special editions, so like Vinegar Syndrome, we've got a couple of companies over here, like 88 Films, I think in the UK, does a lot of old Jackie Chan films and Rock films, Van Damme films and things like that. So they, collectors are still into kind of buying these nice editions, as long as there's a bit of effort put into making them as well. So there's definitely a market there, and it seems to be on the up.
Yeah, I agree, and hopefully we're, maybe, people will, come back to this podcast episode in a year and say like, hey, maybe we'll get comments from people saying, hey, there's a Blu-ray. It's like, yep, there is now, but as us, talking about it, there wasn't, but why don't we get a little bit stuck in on these two films? I think when you were on the last time and we were talking about what a topic might, or who we might discuss if you wanted to come back on, and Rothrock came up. At the time, I didn't consider the fact that she was at 39 films on the site. So I had just done New York Ninja, and of course she did the voice of one of the characters in New York Ninja. So she's now on the cusp of joining the 40 Club, which is it's probably obviously the second most exclusive club. The most exclusive club at the direct-to-video connoisseur is the 50 Club with Dolph and Gary Daniels. But then with the 40 Club after those two, it's Art Camacho, Albert Pyun, and Canon Films that have 40 films on the site. So she would be, she'd be the first woman to join the group, but also from an actor standpoint, she'd be only the third one going in as an actor to have 40 films on the site. So it is kind of a big deal to be doing that many movies of hers. And I don't know about you, I always kind of see her in that sort of that top echelon of direct-to-video action stars that, sort of from an all-time standpoint, not even just like a certain window of time, that she's definitely up there, and not just as one of the best women, but just best overall.
Yeah, I think to some extent she got a little bit undervalued. I think she's pretty much, in terms of her longevity, starting in like mid 80s in Hong Kong. There's only really been one person who's kind of one female who's been a regular kind of action star alongside her, and that was Michelle Yeoh as well, because obviously they both started in the same film, broke out together. So in terms of the West and in Hollywood, she's kind of been out on her own to an extent. They've tried to launch a few people here and there, like Kathy Long in the early 90s, but Rothrock kind of stood head and shoulders above everyone else. And I think partly because, she was as good, if not better than a lot of her male contemporaries.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'd read, there's this online magazine, Hopes and Fears, that did an article as like an oral history of PM Entertainment. And one of the things they talked about was there was this guy who was on the set of was it Guardian Angel, right? That's the one that she did for PM Entertainment, I think.
Yeah.
And so there was some guy, I guess there's some kind of like, I don't know, some odd dude who's like starring in one of the movies or was supposed to be in the movie. And I guess like he did some initial stuff with we did some initial stuff with Richard Norton, and the guy said something like, well, is Cynthia Rothrock is she going to hit me as hard as you are? And he's like, no, she's going to hit you harder. And he was like, okay, oh wow, okay. And I think that tells me, at least with Richard Norton, is that I think he had a sense that like of what Rothrock's talent was, because with the movies that we're going to be talking about that he's in with her, and I think you can also go to the Rage and Honor movies as well, and kind of anything that the two of them did together, I think there was a sense, or I should say, anything the two of them did together here in the States, there was a sense that I think he wanted her to shine in those movies. He wanted everybody to see how good she was, which I think was really important, because I think it would have been easy for him as a guy to be like, yeah, no, make the movie about me instead of her.
Yeah, I think Richard Norton, he's always, I guess he's kind of like the classic laid back Aussie. So he always seemed to be quite happy to, play the bad guy or play like the sidekick in, not just films with Cynthia, but a few others, because he's another one who's very underrated and, very rarely got to play the kind of leading man. But, those two did have a very good chemistry together. I think what was interesting about her career is there always seemed to be a slight hesitancy from the studios to put her in a film, on her own as the lead. So, she worked a lot with Richard Norton as, they would partner up in films. And then there'd be a few others where she was partnered up with Chad McQueen or Jeff Wincott. And I feel like then maybe they could have had a bit more faith and just, had her basically take the film, herself in, a few of those. Because she still tended to, shine over a few of them, I would say, like Wincott and certainly Chad McQueen. But I think when she was with Richard Norton, they had such a good chemistry that it kind of worked, whether he was playing the antagonist or playing, the partner or love interest.
Yeah, I think like, when you mentioned Wincott, I think that's probably a really great example because Martial Law 2, right? That's the one that they do together. That one, you really can see the competitive piece of it, right? Where, and I think part of it is the fact that Wincott was trying to establish himself as a martial arts action lead. And so there was a sense that he wasn't going to take a step back to let Rothrock. But I think in the way that still works, that dynamic still worked in that film where he's really pushing to try to be the lead of the movie and she's pushing to be the lead of the movie. But I think Wincott is one that I really love. But I think like you say, like just from an athletic martial arts practitioner standpoint, Rothrock was even better than someone like him, who still was really great. She had, and I guess maybe as a woman to break into the industry at all, she had to be that level of talent. But I think, martial arts 2 is maybe a good one for people to watch in that sense that you can sort of see her. Wincott's definitely not, like you said, like that sort of the laid back Aussie that Richard Norton is.
Yeah, I guess also that the fact that Hong Kong action is so kind of intense and different to what anyone else kind of knew. They both started in Hong Kong, so they started in the toughest kind of action format that you could do. So coming over to Hollywood together, they've kind of done their dues over in Hong Kong, and then to an extent it's a little bit easier, I guess, when you come over to the West. But I think what they both found challenging often was having to hold back or having to kind of miss your kicks and hold back a little bit. So that was one thing they both had to adapt to. But I think there was that kind of kinship between them that they both kind of come from Hong Kong and earn their stripes to an extent.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was something that Cynthia Rothrock has her own YouTube channel where she sometimes will do some behind the scenes on some of the movies in the past that people knew. And I think Tiger Claws, I think, was one of the ones where I was sort of looking at her her bio, and Tiger Claws I think is one of the first ones that she did that was an American production because she did I guess Fast Getaway, but I think maybe Tiger Claws was shot before it, and then the other ones like the China O'Brien is a Shaw Brothers production, some of the other ones, and so I think she was surprised at like the way the production was run, and of course it was Jalal Merhai's production, so it wasn't like always I think one of the stories she told was in Tiger Claws 2 he hadn't paid Bolo Young yet, and and I guess like he was angry, and I guess Rothrock's mom was on the set, and I guess he Young just walked out, like he's like, I'm not shooting unless you pay me. And so I guess Rothrock's mom went up to Rothrock and said, oh man, Bozo just walked out and walked off the set. And she was like, seems not Bozo, it's Bolo. So I think she was also, I think it was a bit of a transition for her to get used to it. But one of the other things too with her being a female leading lady, I was looking at it kind of at the time, and in terms of you'd have like a lot of one-offs, like a movie like Silk that would be a one-off that was led by a woman, but you never really had these sort of franchises that Rothrock was doing, except for the only other equivalent I could think of was when Andy Sidaris with his Lethal Ladies movies, when he turns the franchise over to Donna Spear, I think it maybe Savage Beach, when he decides that, okay, the Abilene family member who can't shoot straight will diminish that character and have her take over as the lead, which is a weird thing to think about, right? That you're talking about a movie series that's as much about like, women being topless and, topless hot tub scenes and all of that, but that, there's still an action franchise that's really kind of the only other one that you can think of, or that I could think of at least, that was led by a woman at that time. So Rothrock really was by herself. That there were other stars, like you mentioned Michelle Yeoh, who a lot of her stuff was still being done in China. I think you mentioned Kathy Long, Karen Shepard is one, but a lot of them were one-offs, and Mimi Lesios, her films never really quite touched what Rothrock did here. So she was very unique in that sense too, that there really weren't any other women that were doing what she was doing.
Yeah, I think, and even in terms of, Hollywood, they would tend to do, you'd get, the, I guess, quote unquote, actresses who would come in, do an action film. So you maybe had Meryl Streep doing The River Wild, and that'd be her kind of like her action film. And then someone else would do it. Obviously, Sigourney Weaver had a bit more because she had a whole franchise, and then Linda Hamilton as well. But, they would still venture back to, doing dramas. And I don't know whether that was partly where some of the bigger female stars in Hollywood just didn't want to get shoehorned if they had a bit of success in an action film, or whether it was just studios thinking, well, we want to try, we'll do a one-off here and see if it works, and then we'll do a one-off over here and see if that works again. But it was kind of a shame that there wasn't a bit more faith in, trying to push Rothrock out and, put a bit more money into her films. Because if you look in the early 90s, there was this big push to, get studio films with new action stars. So they had Jeff Speakman, Thomas Ian Griffith, and then, they were putting reasonable amounts of money in. And I think maybe, one of those studios could have taken more of a gamble on Cynthia.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing, because there was still that sense in I think in the late 80s, early 90s, when she starts doing films here in the US, that other than Van Damme, obviously he was a more martial arts based hero, but he also was like very ripped and had the muscles as well. And then Seagal was definitely, he did not have the traditional physique, but was more martial arts based. But we still were getting, how many, Schwarzenegger movies, Stallone movies, these big guys that just, big muscle bound guys that were doing the action films. And I wonder if there was a sense of like, I think like you said, they were trying it out with Speakman, they were trying it out with Thomas Ian Griffith, if maybe they thought it just wasn't working and they weren't going to gamble with Rothrock. I mean, another one that they didn't gamble with was Don the Dragon Wilson, who, it would have been interesting to see him get some big screen films. And, I think both of them, I think you're right. I think with Rothrock, seeing her in China O'Brien, despite the fact that it's a lower budget production, so it's hard to imagine it on a big screen, a bigger budget Hollywood production. But I think from a movie star standpoint, I think she could have carried it off.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know with, guys like Don Wilson, Jeff Speakman following up Perfect Weapon, a lot of these guys were kind of unfortunate because they had kind of opportunities, that were put their way, or, for some reason or other, they just didn't come off. So, I mean, there was that rumor about a film called, I think it's called The Executioner. There was going to be Sylvester Stallone, William Friedkin directing, and at one point Cynthia was attached to that. So, she kind of waited around for that, and she got paid quite a lot of money. I think she said something when she was interviewed by Scott Adkins that it was actually the most money she'd made for a film that never got made. And, she was waiting around for that to kind of go into production. It was very, very close. And while she's waiting around, she has a chance to do China O'Brien 3, but she turns it down. Because she's waiting around for the big film, so to speak. So it's just those fine margins where, it's close, but it doesn't quite come off.
Yeah, and probably around that same time, she gets a TV pilot with Stacy Keach for Irresistible Force, which
Yeah.
would have been a network TV show here in the United States, probably akin to something like, the Sammo Hung TV show here, Martial Law, or, Walker, Texas Ranger, or something like that, which would have been another one that would have probably pushed her to the mainstream. And for whatever reason, CBS decided not to pick it up. So they just released the pilot as a standalone movie, which was just a, Die Hard in a mall kind of film. But I mean, she was electric in it. She was just fantastic and
Yeah.
great to watch.
I mean, that was a really enjoyable film. I liked that one.
Yeah, I mean, imagining a weekly series with that, and I think that would have also been something that would have introduced the world to her, and they would have been like, well, we got to do something. We got to, and maybe it wouldn't have led to the big screen success that she would have liked, but I think it would have been something a little bit more stable. Like you said, she got paid the most for a movie that never got made with Sylvester Stallone. So, network TV would have probably also paid her more than any of her films did.
Yeah, and you kind of get that, that mainstream. You're on TV every week, so it works quite well for Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
By which time his film career had kind of dwindled anyway. So to be able to kind of go straight into Walker, Texas Ranger was quite beneficial for him, I think, because he still kind of maintained his presence on a different format.
Yeah, and I think for Rothrock, as someone who's trying to break through, I think it would have had a similar effect. And I think small screen success doesn't always translate to big screen success, but I think it would have been, like you said, it would have been something more than, because you look after Irresistible Force and it's like, okay, she's kind of going back to doing more sequels. Lady Dragon, she's finally working with PM Entertainment and places like that, because I think it just maybe at that point she kind of understood that it was between those two things happening that it was going to be tougher for her.
Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes, you get those opportunities and it's, if one kind of goes to the wayside, then it's difficult to kind of get more come in. And then by the time DVD is coming in, I think, you're getting Dolphin, Van Damme and Seagal. They're all kind of dropping down into straight to video. And they're kind of almost pushing, the likes of Gary Daniels and Cynthia down kind of a level. And they're struggling to get leading roles in the kind of straight to video world.
Yeah, I mean, you can look exactly at her bio on IMDb and see exactly where that happens, where it's like 2001, 2, she's still making movies. 2004, she ends up doing this sci-fighter movie that I think also was with Don the Dragon Wilson. Does another film called Lost Bullet in 2007, which I have never been able to track down. I don't know. I don't know where that movie ended up, where it came out. She plays a character named Cynthia. It may even not even been released. I don't know.
I think I remember seeing a Spanish version of that at some point. Was that the one with Carradine in as well?
Yes. Yeah.
David,
exactly. Yeah. Bala Perdida, I guess, is the Spanish. Yeah. So I mean, maybe that's where it was. Maybe it got released abroad, or maybe it got released in a Spanish-speaking. It looks like it was maybe released in Spain. I don't know. Said it had a release date of February 3rd, 2007 in the U.S. So supposedly it was released. It looks like, it wasn't released in Spain until 2014. So who knows? Yeah, what happened? But like you said, it's kind of indicative of that time period where, you've got Dolph dropping down, but then also Seagal and Van Damme dropping down to direct to video. They were pushing her out, pushing Don the Dragon out.
Yeah.
Gary Daniels. I think the unique thing is that Gary Daniels kept working through that period. He was just sort of taking more like lower tier films, whereas it looks like Wilson and Rothrock kind of took a break from it all. I think Cynthia Rothrock has a span of after that Lost Bullet film doesn't work out, she doesn't come back until 2012, where she does the David Dakota film Santa's Summer House, where she plays Mrs. Claus. And now she's doing more films, but and I think I want to say that Wilson had a similar one where he did the Jesse V. Johnson movie The Sentinel, and I think that was what it was called. Yeah, and then he disappeared for a while, and then he comes back with a very small role in the 4th Scorpion King movie. And now he's doing movies again too. So I wonder if for both of them, they were just looking at the scripts that were coming across their desk and just thought, like, what is the purpose of this?
Yeah, I think it's in part that. I think also maybe there's just a little bit more of a nostalgia boom again. So, but they might be getting more offers. It's difficult because whereas maybe they make quite a reasonable amount of money 15, 20 years ago, or even going 30 years ago, you know films that are costing maybe $100,000, you're not going to be getting paid a massive amount. And these tend to be films where they can only afford to get someone in like Don Wilson or Cynthia for maybe for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've noticed with some of these is that, like, I mean, there's the movie Showdown in Manila where it's just like at the end of the
Yeah,
film, suddenly like, oh, here's Rothrock, Wilson, and Olivier Gruner,
yeah.
and just like, oh, here we go, just shove them in at the end of the movie, and there you go. And it was funny because I think the character, it was that I can't remember the guy's name, the Russian, Nevsky, Alexander Nevsky.
Yeah, Nevsky, yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because he's the main hero guy, and suddenly you bring in these big names, and Casper Van Dien's already there, and it was just kind of like watching the movie, going, why weren't they the leads of this movie? Like they're all like, yes,
Yeah.
like it was supposed to be a Nevsky vehicle, but it was like, almost like by him bringing all these names in, it was kind of like us thinking like, or at least for me, I was like, huh, they should have been the leads here instead of this Nevsky guy who's kind of just this wooden actor who, I mean, he was trying, he was doing his best.
Well, he's kind of self-funding, isn't he? So he's
Right.
he's promoting and pushing himself, which I kind of admire, because if you want to do something, you might as well do it yourself.
Yeah.
And he's obviously got the money to do it. So yeah.
Yeah, and he's got a couple. He's got one that he did with Rothrock and Art Camacho. It's like there's some westerns, or it's a series of westerns, I guess, that they're doing. That could be really interesting to see how those come off. That what is it, like something taken from Rio Bravo, Gunfight at Rio Bravo are the two, and so. Yeah, I mean, it could be interesting to see if maybe some of this, someone like a Nevsky is someone who can give them projects to do that they might actually, have maybe more of a say in or more of a role in, that might actually make them feel better about the fact that maybe they aren't getting a lot of money from these roles, but at least they're back in and doing movies that they actually, enjoy doing.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice that if they can kind of get roles in films which are made in the right spirit as well. I think sometimes it's difficult if you're waiting around and then someone wants you to come in for a few days on something, I guess, like Santa's Summer House or whatever it was. I mean, I guess it could be fun, and there was 2 or 3 other stars in there as well, so it's almost like, okay, we'll turn up, have a bit of a good time with Gary Daniels and everyone else. Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I'm hoping to do 1 or 2 things at some point with Cynthia.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome. Now, from your standpoint as a screenwriter, would it be something where she's already in on the project or something, and it's a matter of like it's something that maybe she's attached to later, or something where she's already been signed onto the project and it's a matter of writing the role for her there?
I mean, with certain stars, it's sometimes that they get attached and then I'll write for them. But from my perspective, it's I've tried to kind of subtly kind of use Inception, like the Nolan film, to kind of get her name tentatively attached to certain scripts, but sometimes it's difficult. I mean, I had one screenplay where there was a character that would have been perfect for Cynthia, but then during the rewriting process, that character gets cut out. So that means, there's not really a suitable role then. But, I'm working on something at the moment, and then hopefully, we can get a kind of go ahead on that. And then hopefully I can offer a role her way on that one. So, we'll see what happens. It's difficult, really. And sometimes it's about, the value of the name. So, my idea of value might be different to, some distributors. So we'll have to see, really.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. And maybe with like you said, with the nostalgia piece there, if if people would say like, okay, Rothrock is enough of a name because people are coming back to these movies and wanting to watch them, or like you said, if maybe the
Yeah.
distributor would look at it and be like, nobody knows who she is, or nobody, which is a horrible thing to think, that people wouldn't know who she is, but maybe the distributor might say something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. Different distributors have different ideas of who's hot and who's not at the moment. Sometimes, it can be just because someone's done 3 or 4 films in a year and they're kind of oversaturating themselves, like, Eric Roberts maybe.
Yeah.
But I think, there's been a bit of a nostalgia boom. She's got a couple of things coming out on Blu-ray, so they're getting nice re-releases like Righting Wrongs. And then you had Cobra Kai, the last season that had just shown. They made mention of her in that, so there was a bit of a reference to her in that. And then a few kind of people, thought maybe it would be cool if she got a part in, that show at some stage. So you never know if the filmmakers are aware of her and obviously have a soft spot for Rothrock. They might at some point put her in the show, which could boost her up again. So yeah, we'll see. And she still seems to be really kind of popular on the things like Comic Cons and martial art circuits. So she's always traveling the world, it seems, going to all these different events and making appearances. So she's kind of got that, there's that awareness associated with her. So hopefully there'll be a bit more of a push to kind of get her into something, and then really interesting.
Yeah, I think that could be awesome, because I think I'd be really interested to see you as a really big action fan, kind of seeing that collaboration, seeing the part that you'd write for her and her, getting a chance to really do that piece in there, because I do think that's one of the things with her recent stuff that's a little bit sort of there isn't as much in her recent stuff that really harkens back to this stuff that we're going to be talking about here, when she really was such a a huge force in the action world. And it would be nice to kind of see some of those come back. And I know she has a bunch of stuff, it looks like, in production and filming, in development. So hopefully some of those also will kind of because I'm seeing like things like Martial Arts Kid, Doggone Hollywood, she plays the mom in a car. Those kinds of things obviously aren't going to really move the needle as much as like if she, we get a scene of her like, getting to fight somebody, or, showing some of what she, what we remembered her for.
Exactly. I think, there's maybe 2 or 3 things that she's got coming up. And I think 1 or 2 of them are kind of from a little bit like the Nevsky kind of thing, where someone is kind of self-producing something, and it's, I guess maybe she's, it's someone else's ego project, but they're very aware of these old stars and kind of want them in the film. So that, that could be a good thing, or it could be that they kind of get a bit underused, but we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of excited to see, to see if that happens there. Now thinking about China O'Brien, I think I don't know for you if this was one that was like that you kind of remember from seeing in the video store or on TV or anything like that, or for me this was my introduction to Cynthia Rothrock.
Yeah, this was mine too. So I recall kind of seeing her being interviewed on, like, I think it was a kids' TV show in the UK, kind of like a classic Saturday morning entertainment show. So I think she was on it being interviewed or demonstrating, and then they showed a couple of clips from the film. And, then I kind of vividly remember sort of seeing it in the video shop as well. I think there was a big poster at one point, that had been put up for China O'Brien. So this was the first one for me.
Yeah, I was trying to remember myself if it was a video store poster or if it was a trailer in another movie. But I just remember, I feel like there was a trailer where it was like, because I can think of like the trailer guy's voice, like, Cynthia Rothrock and China O'Brien, or, something like that. But this was definitely the one that like, okay, this is, this going to the video store and seeing this. I don't remember renting a lot of her movies as much as seeing them on cable sort of after this one. I think a lot of the movies that I caught of hers, like, Lady Dragon, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit, Rage and Honor, those ones were definitely like, if either having paid cable channels, or just seeing them in those kind of environments. TNT channel here in the U.S. used to show a lot of action movies like that were a lot of fun, there were a lot of kind of this quality. But when you're watching it now, it's like you can see that like she is a next level talent, I think, and this being her introduction, I guess, or her first kind of Western production. I mean, it was produced by the Shaw Brothers, but it's kind of the first one that takes place in the United States. I think there was probably a sense maybe on her end, and maybe everybody's end, that this is just the start of something big.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. It's kind of that middle ground, isn't it? So the fight scenes still carry over some of that kind of speed and energy from Hong Kong, even if they're probably shot a little bit more like traditional Western, fight scenes. So it's kind of that middle ground. But comparatively to what a lot of the other kind of stars of the time were doing, that she was doing some really good fight scenes in this film, and a few of the ones around that time. Probably even more complicated sort of choreography than even someone like Van Damme, because I know he had, he would do the show-stopping kind of helicopter kicks, but he would have a very kind of, he'd have his kind of routines that he would do, leading up to those.
Yeah, this was definitely with Rothrock. It was like just sort of out of the gate, you get these scenes with her. I mean, especially like the scene where the dad. So maybe just give people a quick synopsis of the movie. Rothrock plays a big city police officer who she kills someone in the line of duty, and I can't remember that she resigns or that they actually have her turn in her gun and her badge.
So she resigns.
That's what I thought. Yeah, because the synopsis on IMDb is saying she's forced to hand in, and I didn't think it was that way. I thought maybe, but never know if I missed something about that. But but then we have like a walking tall scenario when she goes back to her hometown where her dad is the sheriff, and there's some baddies that have taken over. It also has a bit of a Roadhouse feel, except without the club involved. But the baddie kind of has the almost Ben Gazzara. Roadhouse baddie kind of feel. But essentially, when her dad's dead, they want to put this toady that the baddies have planted in the sheriff's department. They want him to be the new sheriff, but there's an emergency election, and so she runs against this guy, and the town kind of rallies behind her. In addition, of course, we have Richard Norton, who plays Matt, a guy from the hometown that she kind of reconnects with, who also happens to be a martial arts expert. And then Keith Cook, this is technically his second role. He was in Picasso Trigger with the Andy Sidaris movie. That was like his first role, but he really doesn't do any martial arts in that one. But here he plays a Native American who his hand is maimed by these baddies, and so he is out for revenge as well. And so together, them with some of the other people in the town, they sort of fight back these baddies here. And I think that the scene that I was alluding to is where Rothrock's dad is still alive, and they go to confront the baddies because somebody's complaining that they're stealing. That this guy's complaining that they're stealing his timber, and when they get there, the baddies start to sort of try to strong arm the sheriff, and that's when Rothrock gets sort of unleashed into action. And that first scene there, you get to see some really great stuff, and I think it just sort of sets the stage for what the rest of the movie's going to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the fight scenes are really good in this, and obviously, I think some people might not be aware that it's directed by Robert Klaus, who did Enter the Dragon. So there's a bit of caliber behind the camera as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, I don't know if you caught it, it seemed like there were a couple times where you could see the baddie sort of waiting to get hit. A couple times where that part wasn't maybe as cleaned up as you might see in a Hong Kong production.
Yeah.
But it definitely, like you said, the speed is there. And, Keith Cook is new to this, whereas Rothrock and Norton have been doing this for a long time. And I think for sure those two come in and they just really just deliver on those scenes. And I think Cook, he definitely holds his own with them, despite the fact that this is his first film. I think he'd been a practitioner for a while before that, so it wasn't like this was all new to him. But yeah, I think, like you said, I think Klaus was like the right person to direct her first film here in the U.S. and it definitely shows. I think it's a really solid film in that respect.
Yeah, for sure. And I think considering that it's sort of her first significant acting role, really, because I mean, in the Hong Kong films, she would be, she'd be dubbed over, but her remit was never really to be doing much in terms of acting. Any kind of emotional reactions had to be kind of big and kind of overdone, because that's the kind of style, and it's usually in kind of slightly comical films. So it's the first one where she's kind of really got to hone into being an actress as well, which and in that regard I think she does a good job in this one.
Yeah, and I think you could even make a point too that Klaus, I think, does a good job of like not letting her get in too bad of a situation. Like for example, she has to cry over her father dying.
Yeah.
He could have let that go on really long, and maybe that would have been a point where maybe you watch it and you're like, okay, this is beyond what her scope is as an actress. But
yeah,
instead of letting it go on too long, so just to kind of give people a sense of what happens here, and if you haven't seen the movie, definitely try to track it down if you can. But the dad goes out to handle an incident, or he's called about an incident, so he goes into his car to go out to see what's going on. And when he starts the ignition, the car blows up, and Rothrock realizes that his partner probably is going to meet the same fate. And I guess it's their maid that they have. I guess they have a maid living with them. She calls the partner to come out, and of course, Rothrock, while she's in her tears and crying over her dad having just been blown up, before she can cry too long, she realizes like, oh no, what are you doing calling the partner? He's going to get blown up too. And she tries to save him, and she's not able to. So it's sort of like, we don't get her crying too much, because suddenly she's got to jump back into action like that, which I thought was a good move, because I think that's something you see a lot with Wilson. They used to do it to Wilson a lot, where they would just put him in situations where it just seemed like he wasn't at that level yet where he should have been trying to act out those scenes, and it didn't always look good. And I think Lawrence Lamas is another one. They used to do that to him all the time, where you just watch it and be like, he's not really crying, and he's not really doing a good job of it. I mean, at least she was doing a good job crying, but they didn't let it linger too long.
Yeah, I guess that's a kind of action trait as well, particularly around that time, that they didn't want to rest too much on the emotional scenes. They want to kind of kick into the action quite quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a movie that I think, to some extent, I think, as I was watching it, I thought they could have almost like, said it a little bit differently, where maybe Rothrock is in there doing her big city thing, and her dad gets killed in like the first 15 minutes, and she's got to come back and sort of take over. We had a phenomenon that I call baddie in a can, where all of these bad guys are established bad guys just the moment you see them. You don't need to do any like background on what they're doing, what they're up to, or anything like that. I mean, that first scene that she's in the bar and she's beating them up there, I mean, they were obviously not, they're people that we, anybody watching the film wants to see her beat up. And so, but the way they decided to do it, where it's like almost like the first 45 minutes or so are her back home and her dad, like, kind of, I guess, showing that, okay, the judge is in the can for the baddies, there's this sheriff, or this person, there's the deputy who's in the can, that all these sort of things are happening, and the dad's really working uphill about all of this. And we know eventually that he's going to get killed off. It's sort of a inevitability in the film, or at least be incapacitated so that she can take over. And so in a way, there was that piece where, I don't want to say the movie was spinning its wheels, but it was a unique approach to it, to not just have him just die off at the beginning, because a lot of movies, I think, would have done it that way.
Yeah, I think that's at least something a bit different. I mean, for the most part, it kind of does follow the formulas pretty much to the letter for that kind of film. But I think it's one of those where for a first film, you kind of want to have something that ticks the boxes, really, and that kind of walking tool, roadhousey kind of film was a good platform, I think, because I think also what has always been quite good about Cynthia in her career is that she's always come across as likable on screen and had a good presence. So I think they do make the most of that. So you kind of feel sympathetic for her, certainly at the beginning of the film, and then you kind of root for her as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing they mitigated well, which again, it might be just to the fact that Richard Norton wasn't going to try to hog the star role in this, or wasn't going to try to outshine Rothrock. I thought they did a great job in having that the hierarchy fit well, where Rothrock is the star, and then you've got Richard Norton giving us some really great scenes, Keith Cook giving us some really great scenes, but it never diminished what she was doing on the screen. There was never a feeling of like, well, she couldn't take care of herself, or that she needed these guys to save the day for her. It was more like, we're working together as a team to take down this sort of this mass syndicate that's taken over the town.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I mean, it's good to see her. She's playing, someone who's physically able, but also is intelligent as well. So it's quite different to what most of the straight to video female characters of the time would be. They'd be consigned to being like a love interest, or someone a bit helpless. But this was something completely different, really.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good segue for Lady Dragon, because I think there's some of the aspects of that I think that they almost where they sort of had trouble with mitigating the fact that she was a female lead. But there was one thing I did like about China O'Brien, is that they seemed to know well enough that, like, okay, as a female lead, like they wanted her to be pretty and feminine on those aspects, but at the same time be able to hold her own and take down guys that are much bigger than her in a way that was very believable. I think her martial arts skills are such that you believe her being able to like hit these guys and make them there's definitely a lot of power in the way she punched, that you would believe her being able to take these guys down. And I think for a first movie for her, this was exactly the kind of thing that needed to happen, where it doesn't have the, like you said, like she's not like the love interest, she's not the damsel in distress, she's not any of those aspects. She is the woman who's coming in to clean up this town, clean up her own town. She's got people helping her out. Yes, I mean, most of these movies, the hero does have somebody helping them out. So there's people helping her out, but they're not in any way like taking over for her, or showing that she's not capable herself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, from a performance kind of point of view as well. Yeah, as you say, her punches look powerful. I think when I was listening to her interview with Scott Adkins, he would mention the fact that one thing that he noticed when he used to watch her, growing up on video, is that her kicks look really powerful. So, she looks, she looks the part, and then from a performance point of view in the fight scenes, she more than kind of matches those male contemporaries.
Yeah, and I think I wonder if, because I mean, like, this movie I think seems to navigate it all really well, but I think because the action film, it has just so many embedded cliches, stereotypes that it needs, that there was maybe a fear of like, well, how do we mitigate these with Rothrock? Are we gonna have a guy be the damsel in distress, or are we, like, they didn't know what to do with any of those things. Here, they didn't need to do any of it. They were able to have a successful action film without feeding into, they were able to feed into certain cliches that were sort of not gender specific, but it wasn't like they felt like they felt like they needed to flip certain ones and use them in the movie. We didn't need any damsels in distress. I mean, I guess we technically kind of do, right? Because he has the baddie has a woman that he's, I guess, it's supposed to be his girlfriend, that he's like has her like tied up in a bedroom for most of the film. But she's not really like somebody that needs to be rescued in that sense. It's more like we don't even know that, the heroes don't even know that she's there. It's just sort of like another way to sort of enhance the baddie as being a bad guy more than it is like a damsel in distress element.
Yeah, for sure. I think they did a really good job of really kind of selling her as a believable heroine in the film. So I think it's one that works really well, as particularly as a first kind of Western film where most of the audience would not have been so aware of what she'd done in Hong Kong. So she's coming to it kind of new, really.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good segue into Lady Dragon, because to me, I think Lady Dragon does sort of try to work in some of these tropes of, it's interesting. I think and actually, maybe before we move on to Lady Dragon, was there anything else about China O'Brien that you wanted to mention?
I think I'll just mention quickly that like Keith Cook has always been one of those where I was surprised he didn't really take off as much as he deserved to. I think he kind of foreshadows a lot of the current performers, and maybe even someone like Scott Adkins, who do these very kind of eye catching kicks. So if you think about it, he's got that show stopping triple kick in this. These were the kind of things that people had almost never seen, particularly in the West. Before people became more aware of like Donnie Yen and maybe Jet Li. So he was kind of a little bit different with those kind of acrobatics that kind of even blew sort of the Van Damme helicopter kick out of the water.
Yeah, and this is like really the first film he does where he's doing martial arts, because again, Picasso Trigger that comes out a couple of years before, where he also goes under his birth last name or birth surname of Hirabayashi. But yeah, I wonder if it's a similar thing with him that it was to Rothrock, where they didn't know. I think he's a lead I think in Heat Seekers. I think or Heat Seeker, the one the Albert Pyun film. I think it's the one film that he's the lead in. And again, I think you're right, because I think it's almost like he came too soon, right? Like Adkins comes on the scene, and everybody's like, yeah, let's have him do 4 films a year, and he's watch this kind of thing. Whereas you wonder if Kobe if he was born 10 years later, if maybe that's the roles would have been there for him, because I agree, he's someone that I think we could have seen in a lot of stuff. And I mean, maybe too, like, he didn't want those roles. Maybe he wanted to take a step back. Maybe he didn't, he wasn't trying to push for it. But I do feel like in the ecosystem, he wasn't probably getting offered the things that maybe he should have been.
No, I mean, I know he had the the Mortal Kombat films, and I think he plays 2 different characters in 2 different films, but those kind of didn't kick off as much as maybe they might have done. So by the time he's kind of done those, albeit in small parts, that he's maybe not getting the offers off the back of those. And I know that I think he wears a mask in 1 or 2 of them, so obviously you've got that factor as well, where you're in this kind of slightly bigger production, but then no one can really identify you.
Yeah, definitely the first Mortal Kombat, he was Reptile in that one. So
yeah.
So whereas in the second one, Annihilation, he was Sub-Zero. He had his mask off for some of that one. And I think the other problem too, again, is that kind of maybe going back to your article that you wrote about comic book movies in the 90s, a lot of these attempts at making franchises were kind of fits and starts. And I think Mortal Kombat's an example of that, where the second movie, the first movie did well enough that they could put a second movie, but the second movie just wasn't quite what people were looking for at that time, and that was it. People were, they've since come back to making Mortal Kombat movies again, because they're trying to, find another franchise to work with. But I think a third Mortal Kombat movie, maybe he's in that one, maybe he gets a bigger role in that one or something. But yeah, it just didn't work out.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and I think it's interesting what you say about him being maybe ahead of his time. I feel like maybe Cynthia Rothrock in some ways is as well. Yeah. If you look at maybe the last 10, 15 years, where there's been this big kind of push to have female action heroes, for the most part, everyone is kind of, it's an actress or a model who's being, made to look more kind of, I guess, skilled than they actually are, or it's there's a lot of use of doubles and wire work and things like that. I think with that kind of push at the moment, someone who's like the legit and the real deal, with her kind of presence, would have done really well, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree, because you think of Amy Johnston, for example, and Lady Blood Fight. I always get the name wrong on this. Was it Female Fight Club? I think the one that she did with Dolph. I always if it's Female Fight Club, Lady Fight. So where I was but yeah, I mean, Amy Johnston's a very solid martial artist, but Rothrock, you're talking with Rothrock, it's like elite athleticism that she had. And yeah, I think you're right. Like, if she was born 10 years later and she's coming onto a scene in the 2000s, maybe it's not quite there for her, but then I think, yeah, she's someone that they would have been, centering, that she would have been starring, she would have been probably getting bigger kind of franchises, things like that. Because if you think of someone like an Amy Johnston that they're using in films, and again, she's a very solid martial artist, but Rothrock was just another level when you see her films. I mean, she's again, she's better than most of the men that she's acting with. She's just, she's in most films, she's probably the best athlete of everybody on the screen. And I think, it's amazing to think about that she probably would be getting her own TV show here in the US. I think, and there's with the proliferation of channels and opportunities for TV shows, I think of like the CW with the Arrowverse kind of thing. I mean, someone in her level easily could have gotten a role heading one of those TV series.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also you've got all these streaming premieres at the moment as well. There seems to be a big push. Netflix and Peacock and all these kind of channels are, pumping a lot of money into doing premieres. And I think there would have been a market there for someone like, Rothrock to maybe have a run of, films maybe shot for maybe, $10-15 million, as opposed to, what she was doing back in the day would have been, $2-3 million movies.
Yeah, and and if she's 10 years, if she's born 10 years later, you could see like she probably would have been. I mean, maybe they would have been thinking big name like Scarlett Johansson for Black Widow, but maybe not. Maybe they are thinking it was someone like her. She would have really been interesting in a role like that. I think she could. I mean, I think she still could play a role like that if she had the opportunity. But thinking of like some of those franchises that needed women who were martial artists, the idea of being able to say, okay, we don't need to double her as much. She can actually do these parts on screen. We don't have to train her. She can, she can even choreograph the fights. That would be a whole different level that would have made those movies even better than they were.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the opportunities might have been there, I think, to do that. I mean, there are, there are certain stars that do it quite well, for what, for the fact that they're kind of being given that crash course training, and, they're being helped out by CG and wire work and things like that. So, her being the kind of real deal, they could have done something, quite interesting in launching her as a really kind of strong, empowered star.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's funny. I like you said, I think about that with Keith Cook. I hadn't really considered it with her as well. That the environment had changed, over time. That she's someone that would have been a real standout now. Had she come along, maybe she's 10 years younger. She's born in the late 60s, and she's sort of coming of age probably in the 90s. But then in the 2000s, when those roles were starting to become bigger. Yeah, she could have jumped right in there and taken on some of those parts.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the counter to that is that she would have missed that early kind of Hong Kong action boom. So it's, there's that might have been the trade-off.
Right. And that's a good point too, because, as someone who was the kind of practitioner that she was of martial arts, there is that other element of it where you need to be able to have the theatrical vibe in a film. There aren't many that are able to do both. And I think that was one of her things that she learned in Hong Kong, was how to do both, be a practitioner, but also be someone who can make it look really great on screen like that. Obviously Norton is another one coming from that school. Daniels is one. I think of, some of the modern ones. I think of like Michael Jai White is really good at doing both, the practitioner and the, or Adkins. I think Adkins, he's talked about how he's not really like formally trained in like any specific martial arts. Like I don't think he has any black belts or anything like that, but he kind of learns what he, everything that he takes in, and then just knows how to make it look fantastic on screen. And so you might be right that it's possible that like, some of the examples that I can think of, like I think of, some of the mixed martial art, female mixed martial arts stars that have come over to films. They're good, but they're not like Cynthia Rothrock good.
Yeah, I think maybe someone like Gina Carano was probably the closest.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of having some kind of longevity and kind of some. I mean, she had a good kind of platform to begin with Haywire, um, and then did sort of reasonably well doing DTV stuff. And then obviously, getting that role in Mandalorian was, a good platform. So I mean, maybe if Rothrock was coming around at that kind of time, she might have been doing something similar, or even ending up in something like that, the Mandalorian or that kind of show.
Yeah, and when I was watching The Mandalorian recently, I was like, kind of just saying to myself, like, oh, like Gina Carano, why couldn't you just like kept like some of your sort of more problematic opinions to yourself? Because yeah, she was really great on that show, and I think a lot of the scenes that they were able to do with her, where again, like they didn't need to double her, that she could do the scenes herself. She added a lot to that show, and there is a sense that she could have been maybe. I think you're right. I think she's probably one. I think even more so than maybe Amy Johnston. Natalie Byrne is one who came from a gymnastics background, who they're kind of tapping to kind of move into this realm as well. That I think, she was the real deal. And maybe, if Mel Gibson can make movies again, hopefully she'll kind of, do a redemption tour or something like that and maybe get back in, because you're right. Like, I think she's one that like, I think with this sort of the newer crop here, and I think you're right. Rothrock maybe would have she probably would have, in her competitive martial arts, she probably would have started to get into like the, I guess maybe she would have been a little bit older for the, if she was born in the late 60s, she might have been a little old for the female circuits for mixed martial arts that they'd started to develop. But maybe not. She might have still been able to compete in those, and then would have had some kind of name recognition from UFC or wherever that she came from, to then sort of catapult into a film career.
Yeah, I think, yes, certainly. I think she would have had the presence to kind of, get some interesting opportunities.
Yeah. So it could have been interesting. Maybe this is probably a good segue for us to get into to Lady Dragon, the second of the films that we watched here, because this one is, for me, it's very different from China O'Brien. It has some elements to it that we didn't see in China O'Brien that are sort of your classic film cliche pieces. But overall, I think it's a very interesting film in her IMDb or her filmography. But as we kind of get into this one, Tom, what were your kind of overall thoughts on Lady Dragon?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Obviously, it's got shades of Kickbox kind of mixed with more of a standard revenge film. In this one, Richard Norton plays the bad guy, and he's always been really good at that. So he likes to kind of, he never sort of overdoes it, but he's got a really kind of good maniacal presence, I think, when he's playing these kind of roles. And they kind of have a good chemistry, whether they're working together on, the same team, or whether they're kind of opposing each other. So it's got interesting elements, but it's definitely kind of rough around the edges, I think. I did quite like the locations, I'll say that though. So during this period where, you got a lot of films like Bloodsport was filming in the Philippines, there were a lot of films filming in Thailand. This one films in Indonesia. So everywhere's kind of like, there's a lot of these films being made in South Asia, Southeast Asia. And I think it's quite interesting in terms of what you see on screen. And it's got its interesting moments. It's also got really odd editing choices, I thought. So there's really weird sort of edits in the film. I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, for sure. You're right. It had some interesting edits. It had some interesting like film element or some story elements that were interesting as well. It does some really unique things. I think just to give people the basic synopsis, and this is one that you can find on YouTube, but it's still I think it's kind of the same thing. I think there are DVDs available in kind of all around the world, but I don't know that there's any. There's definitely not a Blu-ray yet for this one, and it's not like a DVD. It's in print, as far as I know.
I don't believe so. Whether they're in kind of very small territories, but there's definitely nothing in print as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. So just to give people a sense of the story, Rothrock plays Kathy Gallagher, an ex-CIA agent who's in Indonesia, and she's sort of tracking this baddie played by Richard Norton. Character's name is Ludwig Hauptmann, which no German accent. He just sticks with this straight Aussie accent, so there's not have to worry about that there. But in going to sort of track him down, she sort of goes undercover, and he susses out who she is. And not only is she beaten up, but he also rapes her, and then she gets dumped on the side of the road in the village outside of Jakarta, I believe. And a young boy finds her, takes her back to where his grandfather is, and she sort of is nursed back to help. I think he trains her some in fighting, and she then goes goes undercover. Essentially, there's a woman working in his syndicate who runs a brothel, and she pretends that she gets hit by the woman, hits her with her car, and then sort of insinuates herself with her, becomes friends with her as a way to get back in with Richard Norton so that she can take his criminal empire down. And I think the common cliche or common film element that they use here, of course, is the action hero who is beaten up a lot and has to nurse himself back to health. I guess kind of the Yojimbo element there, without the two game, pitting the two games against each other, but still like the recovering part. I think the thing where they kind of went interesting was the fact that they decided that not only is she getting beaten up, but her character gets raped as well, because it's not something that they would do if it was Norton as the hero and he gets beat up or something like that.
No, I mean, it was, I guess it adds to her kind of need for revenge, doesn't it? But
Right.
it was quite an interesting choice to do. Obviously, they didn't linger on it or show it, so they did a sort of cutaway. So it's almost like it's slightly awkward cutaway. So you kind of have to think for a second. Oh, okay, I guess that's what's just happened. But yeah, like I say, it maybe wasn't edited in the best way.
Right. Well, there's that part of it too, right? That I think they, and I wonder too, because it's interesting with Rothrock, because I think this movie and the sequel, Lady Dragon 2, where her husband in that film gets killed and she's sort of like tied down to a bed, and then I think she's also raped in that one.
Yeah.
Those are the only two films where she experiences anything like that. Lady Dragon's also the only one where she's ever really even a damsel in distress of any kind, where she's ever tied up or anything like that. And again, as we were talking about sort of these cliches for how women are treated in sort of standard action film fare. Obviously, comparing this to China O'Brien, where they don't go anywhere near any of this kind of thing. It's interesting that it's these two Lady Dragon movies that actually touch on either of these for her, because she's never ever, as far as I remember, I don't think she's ever in a position that like she's in with these two films and any other films that she does.
No, not as far as I can remember. I mean, the whole thing between the first and the second one, I'm sure there's probably some kind of story around it. Why, they're both shot in Indonesia, I believe, same director and same writer, and they're essentially the same film. So I'm not entirely sure the background of that, but it does seem a bit odd that they've kind of made Lady Dragon, and then a few years later they make essentially the same film with just slight redressings here and there, and then obviously Billy Drago replaces Richard Norton.
Yeah, and to some extent, you could say that Sam Jones replaces Robert Ginty. That's sort of that other character as well. You're right. Yeah, yeah, they're both David Worth. So and I think with him doing Kickboxer, I guess I think he maybe he likes that element of the person who's like that the hero who's beaten down and has to recover and sort of find growth through that experience. So I get that part of it, but yeah, it's weird that that these are the only movies that she does that have any element like that in them. And I think with talking about a female action star, it's almost like, I mean, again, you don't usually see this happen with the male action stars as well. Like usually, like they have that sort of that shirtless torture scene that seems to come from Rambo, where they all have that thing. And maybe that was part of it. Was they felt like they couldn't do that with her, so they had to do this instead. I don't know, and I wonder from her standpoint too, is if after she does these two movies, if she's like, I don't think for my career it's good for me to be doing this kind of role either. That it does kind of border too much on what women are expected to be in action films, and I'm supposed to be. I need to be the hero, kind of like the Fred Williamson rule, where he always wins at the end. He always gets the girl, and he can't be beaten or anything like that. I wonder if she starts to realize like maybe I need to kind of protect my career the same way.
Yeah, I would guess so, and I think also maybe that's part of the reason why she never kind of resorted to doing a load of like topless scenes, which maybe I would imagine a few of the producers probably requested it at some juncture. They probably said, "Oh, do you think we could have this scene in here?" I think there's one film she does, Sworn to Justice, which is, where she kind of has this sexual side to her, whereas generally she's kind of like, you don't really have that in her films.
Yeah, and I do think to some extent Lady Dragon tried to bring that part out as well, which I get. I think that's again where the difficulty comes in. It's like, okay, well, how do you have Rothrock as a woman and Rothrock as the action lead, where the action lead is just like so tied into this concept of like alpha male masculinity, and
Yeah,
so it did feel like that was one area where Lady Dragon was also trying to, she was wearing sexier outfits, she was sort of playing up that part of her that is sort of like the beauty and the femininity. And so in that sense they were trying to do it there. And I think when you see her YouTube page, I mean, a lot of the pictures of her are in more provocative clothing and things like that. So I think almost like she feel like she's sort of making up for that lost time, because those roles, you're right, like it seemed like other than that one film, in Sworn to Justice, where she had that kind of like that, almost like that love scene with the main character. And I think
yeah.
actually when I was posting my images on Photobucket, I think they took the image down that I had of her, which wasn't really even that like that undressed, but I guess
No,
they
not really. No.
yeah. But you're right that like I think that was one area that these films, maybe that was part of what drew her to these films, is that she could be more of that feminine side to herself as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when it's the male kind of action star and they're having those scenes, it's a bit more gratuitous because, the person opposite them, the female actress, who's usually just a bit part, or they're just there for that scene
Yeah.
in particular, they've got the top off and it's a bit gratuitous. So I guess producers didn't really know how to make that work on the other kind of side of it. I mean, they probably did want to kind of exploit that side of her as well, but she never really did it, apart from maybe Sworn to Justice, where even then it's not that kind of, it's nothing too revealing. I mean, she's got a kata display, a sort of martial arts Tai Chi display, I think it is, where she's in a kind of night dress, and that's about the most gratuitous thing she's ever done.
Yeah.
And even then, it's sort of it's fairly tastefully done, really. So I think obviously she's quite careful about what she was doing back then.
Yeah, and I think because of that sort of this loaded image, I mean, I think too, like in the late '80s, early '90s, when hair metal was the big sort of the dominant music form, especially here in the United States. Like you'd have like Lita Ford was a famous guitarist, or the group Vixen was a all women metal group. But like Lita Ford, it was like all the pictures on magazine covers were of her in like these really sexy outfits. When as a guitarist, she was one of the best at the time, and she did song with drawing a blank here. Right? I don't know why I'm thinking of Osborne. I can't believe I'm drawing a blank of the lead singer of Black Sabbath.
Ozzy Osbourne.
Ozzy Oz. Yeah, I'm having having a senior moment in my early 40s. I don't know why I did that, but like she was a really great guitarist. But then there was this whole thing of like, oh well, no, she if we're gonna put her on the cover of a magazine, she's got to look as sexy as possible. And I wonder for Rothrock's standpoint, because you think of her, right? You think of like the magazine cover she was doing. A lot of them were her, just doing martial arts, and it wasn't like sexy outfits or things like that. And you wonder if maybe that was part of it, that she was careful to make sure like, okay, I want to be seen a certain way because I don't have any choice if I want to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it's difficult to know whether it is, more her decision or, I mean, she did a few quite racy photo shoots, nothing like hugely revealing, but around about that era in the mid kind of 90s. So she definitely, wasn't kind of shy in doing kind of photo shoots and modeling shots. But yeah, in terms of the films, it's, I'm imagining she probably got offered a few more, almost like not Shannon Tweed level, but things approaching that. So maybe she got offered a few films like that and turned them down, which kind of
Yeah.
blended maybe the two together, martial arts and then maybe more of an erotic kind of side as well.
No, that's a really great point, because that period in the early 90s was also big for the erotic thriller. So yeah, I could see that, like, that she may have gotten some of those, like, yeah, like you said, like almost like a Shannon Tweed type
Yeah.
movie.
I mean, she did one movie, I think, called Fatal Passion, which it's got a few kind of scenes like that. I don't think she's the main lead in it, but again, it's not kind of gratuitous and it doesn't sort of linger on a big, long topless shot. So she sort of remains covered up. But I mean, she did kind of dip her toes, I guess, in that genre.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that comes out a couple years after this, or a few years
Yeah.
after. Yeah, and it's one I've never actually seen before. I know, I think I thought I had seen it, but it doesn't look like it, because I would have reviewed it if I'd seen it. And yeah, it's not showing that review, because it's one that sounds familiar. But and of course she's also not anywhere near top billed in it is either. She's kind of
No, I think it was one of those. It might have been an early example in some territories of like a bait and switch. So I know there's a few kind of artworks where she's kind of on the cover, and it almost suggests that it's going to be a bit sexier than it probably is in the the final result.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right. Like, it's because there are some that has Rothrock's name on the cover, and yeah, I think for her, maybe it was her maybe trying to kind of branch out and like do more acting type roles, or show that she could do more acting. But I think ultimately for her, the martial arts and the action lead was really where she should have been. I think she was that good that she should have been leading most of her films. And I think, yeah, it's interesting to kind of see sort of how, now that we have IMDb, we can kind of look at her, like the list of her films, and it's like, yeah, I mean, Fatal Passion is one that she does a couple years after Lady Dragon 2. She also does, Guardian Angel, the PM Entertainment film after that. So, I wonder if even at that point, she's starting to see, like, okay, where's my career going? Because yeah, Irresistible Force doesn't get picked up. She isn't able to do the film with Stallone. So now she's like, okay, well, what can I do to maybe try to branch out or do something a little bit different? And so that's probably where Fatal Passion came in.
Yeah, certainly. I think I guess there's also that aspect of being someone who's beginning to get typecast. You get a little bit bored maybe and want to kind of branch into a few other things.
Yeah, and I do wonder if Lady Dragon kind of falls in with that, because of course you've got it kind of in between there. You've got the Rage and Honor films that sort of, it's almost like, I think they both happen in between the two Lady Dragons. So it's like two more movies that she does in Indonesia, and then of course she does a couple with Godfrey Ho as well, Honor and Glory and Undefeatable. So yeah, I'm wondering if she's sort of kind of getting a sense of how her career starting to shake out even that early on. Lady Dragon, we're talking about only a couple years after China O'Brien that all of this is starting to shake out like that.
Yeah, I get it's difficult really because you always feel like maybe you're one or two kind of bad choices away from not getting another call. So you want to experiment and try different things, but at the same time, sometimes you want to do what's tried and tested. I mean, I guess she did 3 Tiger Claws films, 2 Lady Dragon films, which are essentially the same thing. So yeah, there was that active push to do things a little bit different, like Sworn to Justice and Fatal Passion. And there was another one with Fred Williamson called Night Vision. It's a bit more of a kind of serial killer thriller.
Yeah, and it's that's that character. What's the Dak or Dakota Smith that he plays? Yeah, Dakota. That he kind of uses that character in a few different movies of his. That Dakota Dak Smith character. So it is kind of interesting to see her involved in one of those movies with him.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that was a recurring character.
Yeah, let me see if I can figure out like how many movies he's done as this Dakota Dak Smith character.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like this police detective that he uses in movies, and so yeah, I mean he kind of brought him on earlier on. There's like one movie that he even has a song. I can't remember how the song went, but there's one of them. It was so On the Edge. He did a movie called Rage Within, also with Dakota Smith. So On the Edge, you might know. I think that was one that had Ice-T in it. Down and Dirty, that's the one that has the song for Dakota. That movie also had like Gary Busey in it, a few other names like that. So yeah, this character, yeah. So Night Vision is there. Was Night Vision the first time he used that character? Maybe that's the first time he used them. Yeah, actually, so that's kind of an interesting one there. That's the first time he uses this Dakota.
I quite enjoyed that one actually. I thought that was quite an interesting change of pace for Rothrock, and yeah, I enjoyed the film. That's one, interestingly, that's got, at least in Amazon UK, it's got quite a good HD transfer, because I think it got a Blu-ray release somewhere in Europe. So they, occasionally Amazon, if there's been a Blu-ray release somewhere, they'll get a transfer of it and put it on, to their streaming platform.
Yeah, because I think here in the US, it's available on all the free streamers. So
yeah,
Tubi, Plex, and then also Brown Sugar is a Amazon Prime channel that I think you pay extra for, which again might be because of the Fred Williamson aspect in it, because he's the lead. I think a lot of his movies are on Brown Sugar. Yeah, I think that the quality of the one that's on, again for here in the U.S., I think is also a good quality one, which is rare, I think, for Rothrock's movies, which is kind of too bad that and of course this one's a little bit later 90s, but that a lot of her movies, it seems like you got to try to track down somehow.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like as we said, it's a shame really, but I think sometimes it can be a case that maybe the film was a hit in a certain territory, and that's why it's also got a good release there. Yeah, I think one of the martial laws has also got a fairly good transfer from when I watched it on Amazon. So yeah, every now and again you'll see one pop up.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I think, with Lady Dragon is that the YouTube version that's on there is not the best quality, because it doesn't look as good as the DVD that when I got this when I watched it, when I reviewed it however long ago, when I got the DVD from Netflix. Though actually, on the IMDb page, the trailer also looks kind of like lower quality VHS. So I wonder if maybe my memory is a little bit off on that, but it definitely feels like kind of like a lower quality VHS that you're watching on there, which is kind of too bad, because I think she's she's really, I mean, the opening scene where she's in the sort of the underground fight with the bigger guy, and you kind of see her there with the hood on, and it's to the back of her, and you have a good sense that it's probably her, but when she turns around and she takes her hood off and everything, it's just such a really great scene there. And I think there's a lot of things here in Lady Dragon that are just really fantastic. I mean, the fight scenes are all really good. The fight scene she has with Norton at the end is really good. So it's just one of those things where there's some interesting elements that are unique to her, but I think also from a fighting standpoint, it's really solid.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I agree as well. I really liked her intro in the film, and then toward the end as well, that the kind of final fight scene doesn't really just disappoint, because I guess they've worked together so many times, and they've done so many fight scenes together. It's almost kind of instinctive the way they kind of put something together.
Yeah, and I mean, even just sort of, thinking about, like, I think him fighting with her was really good. I think that's probably why maybe too, like, that the scene where his character rapes her, again, it cuts away, so we don't really even see it, and it's just sort of inferred that it happens. But I wonder too if even that's something where it's like, her working with him doing a scene like that, it's probably a little bit easier that, like, they kind of know where each other's sort of lines are to cross or not cross. And so he I mean, later she does it with Billy Drago, It's not quite the same as it was with Norton, but I think probably, like you said too, she's probably used to him as a baddie, because I think a lot of the Hong Kong films that she did with him, he played the baddie in those ones.
Yeah, I think so. So, you kind of you have a kind of certain chemistry with certain actors, and it's just a bit easier.
Yeah, and I think also too, again, his mindset, because I think I think he understood the talent that Rothrock had, and so he was never worried about either losing a fight to her in a movie, but I think too, like there was never a sense that like he needed to be the star of the film that she was in. I think he wanted to showcase her talent. I think he wanted to see her become as big as she could have, as possible.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suppose because he got his start as more or less a kind of stuntman, that never particularly left him. And obviously, he had a brief kind of run um, as an action star, usually kind of, like second fiddle or playing the villain. But he kind of went and progressed back again into doing stunts. So he's never been one who's had a big ego and wanted to kind of steal the limelight off someone.
Yeah, because I mean, he's fantastic. I mean, he's just, I mean, I think of the
Yeah.
Rage and Honor movies, where the Rage and Honor movies are almost they Rothrock's on the cover of those, but those ones seem more like equal partnerships. Whereas like China O'Brien, she's definitely the main protagonist there, and then of course here he's playing the baddie opposite her hero. Whereas like the Rage and Honor ones, it does seem like those ones are more the two of them together, starring as a team. And in some cases he's taking the lead more on some of those. But yeah, I think I think of like the Cirio H. Santiago movies that he did, those kind of post-apocalyptic ones where he's kind of riding around with like a leather vest with no shirt underneath, and these big guns, and vehicles that have spikes attached to the front and stuff like that. And so yeah, so I kind of think of that as with him as a starring role. But these movies, I mean, he's just there is a sort of larger than life presence that he has as well. It's just, yeah, I think he recognized who Rothrock was, that she was a real special talent. And that doesn't always happen with these movies, that you get someone who's like, okay, this person's a special talent, I'm gonna let them shine in a film like this, and sort of just be happy enough to be there supporting them.
Yeah, I think maybe that's partly the martial arts background as well. They've probably got a big, mutual respect. And, particularly if you've studied for so long and you've been, you're very disciplined in what you do, and the kind of even the philosophical side of martial arts, that kind of, I'd imagine that means you're less inclined to have a kind of big ego. I mean, there have been cases where that, some stars have been known to have a big ego, even when they've been, well renowned in the martial arts world. But yeah, I think he seems quite grounded and down to earth, and obviously Cynthia does as well. So yeah, they kind of they never really step on each other's toes. They work together, and they see the benefit on, the benefit of their mutual chemistry.
Yeah, for sure. I used to always joke that they're kind of like the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers of direct-to-video action, because of how good they were together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, one other piece I wanted to mention was just the there's the party scene where she is invited by the friend to the party at Norton's house, and so she's wearing this glittery dress. It's very very kind of sexy outfit that she's wearing, and she confronts, or she's with Richard Norton, and she discovers that Robert Ginty has been working with him and knows who she is. And there's a sense that like, okay, this might be it for her, where she kind of get captured or something like that. And instead, like, she fights her way out of it, grabs an Uzi off the shelf, which is always good when there's an Uzi around to be able to start firing at people. But then, like, she escapes on a motorcycle wearing that same dress. And I think that might have been, for this movie, one of the best combinations of sort of the sexy feminine with the hard-edged action lead, where, I mean, she's leading these baddies through, the classic, any film that's filmed in Asia, right? They have to destroy as many food trucks as possible, and just destroy as much fruit. I mean, there's like jackfruit falling all over the place and bananas and stuff. But she's like leading these baddies through this chase, and I really like that juxtaposition there. And I think maybe David Worth as a writer and director, he might have not known exactly where where to take pieces and where to not take pieces. Like maybe, for me, I think the rape part wasn't necessary, as sort of the difference between her being a female lead or a male lead. But I think some of the other attempts that he made to do that, again, I think were different from what a lot of the films that we're used to seeing with her, where, and I guess it's probably not easy to do an action scene when you're wearing a dress too. It's probably not the easiest thing to do, but I liked it that he did kind of put those elements in there. So that was one thing that I wanted to touch on for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I guess, she's often, some of the roles she's done has kind of have a masculine edge, I guess. So, they definitely kind of played up on the feminine side in this one. And I think, from a visual standpoint, that set piece did stand out because of that, wearing the kind of glittery cocktail dress while you're escaping on a motorbike.
Yeah, and I mean, we're so used to seeing that kind of thing in a film, especially in ads. It's like almost like, part of the deal, I guess, maybe like the location scouts when they know they're doing a movie in Indonesia, Philippines, or wherever. Like, okay, let's line up the food trucks and smash as many vehicles through them as we can. Yeah, to kind of see it done differently like that, I really liked. Before we kind of wrap up here, Tom, was there anything else about Lady Dragon that you wanted to mention?
I did. I mean, aside from those kind of the Southeast Asian locations, I've always found them quite interesting just from a visual standpoint because they're so markedly different from, the standard kind of LA locations or Canadian locations that a lot of those kind of films would have. And then obviously later on, like early 2000s, it was always Eastern Europe and Romania and Bulgaria. So yeah, I quite liked the exotic nature of those locations, like Indonesia and the Philippines and Thailand. So that's one aspect I really did enjoy. And then also the soundtrack, they're definitely riffing on kind of Paul Herzog, his music in Kickboxer and Bloodsport.
Yeah, what was the I'm trying to think, was this the movie where oh no, it was I think of China O'Brien. I'm confusing the two. Where China O'Brien, where she's going back home to like kind of like the kind of post Pat Benatar female rock song that's kind of like a little bit less edgy. Whereas this one, I think I know what you're talking about here with the music here, that it had a bit of a Kickboxer feel that I think Worth almost wanted to replicate elements of Kickboxer in this.
Yeah, certainly. I think they did certainly kind of try to exploit that side. Because, ultimately that's what a lot of these films did, Blood Fist kind of emulating Bloodsport. So I guess you do whatever you can to really kind of draw your audience in, even if it's by association with something else.
Yeah, and I wonder, someone like Worth too, maybe as a writer and director, maybe he sort of has his sort of maybe standard paradigm or something that he was working with, and he's just like, okay, let's see if we can put this together and make it a little bit different. Using Rothrock. He may have been intrigued about the idea of doing Kickboxer with Rothrock and having it be a female lead instead of the traditional male action lead.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Yeah. I'd be interested to know whether it was something that came kind of from him initially, or whether it was more like a distributor saying, okay, well, we want to do, like a female kickboxer with Cynthia Rothrock, and whether he was kind of like a gun for hire.
Yeah, that could be. Well, because he ended up doing the sequel as well, and again, almost replicated the same thing for the sequel. That they thought the first one did so well that, and I can see how the first one would have done well. I can see how if this thing was in video stores not long after China O'Brien was out, that this thing being on the shelves would have probably done well. Or if they were just like, okay, she's in Indonesia, let's shoot 2 movies and just get 2 films in the can.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could have worked out that way as well. It's just an interesting choice as well to essentially, remake your own movie. and then label it as a sequel.
Yeah. It's funny thinking about direct-to-video movies, the different techniques that are used for these kinds of things. And this one element of the DTV sequel is an interesting one of sort of just doing the same thing again and just calling it part 2, and just replacing it with different actors and having them play similar roles.
Yeah, I mean, I know they've done it a few times, and there's a couple of Blood Fist films which are essentially the same thing. But I've never seen anything quite like this, where 1 and 2 just have almost the same plot points, and yeah, like you say, they've just basically flipped up some of the actors.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if Richard Norton was just. You wonder, like, Richard Norton, if maybe he just wasn't available for it, and maybe that's why he didn't do that one. I'm trying to think from his bio if he had other things going on. Well, actually, it says he got married in 1993, so I wonder if maybe that's what it was he couldn't do the second one because he was getting married at that time, with Lady Dragon 2.
Yeah, it could have been, yeah.
Yeah, something as simple as that because he well, I guess no, they couldn't have him in the movie, right? Because they killed his character. Or no, they didn't kill his character off, did they? They just he just got arrested.
Yeah, unless they would have had him, essentially as they're repeating the plot line again, they might have had him play the same character.
Yeah.
I mean, the actress who played his kind of right-hand woman in the first one, she returns in the sequel as well. But I think she's got a different character name.
You might be. Well, you're right. She's Sorry, and then she's Susan. Yeah. So she does. She plays somebody different. So they could have had Norton playing somebody different too. That would have worked just as. I mean, I think that's part of it too. Is I think from our standpoint as film watchers, if the action's there and all of those elements, having the same person play. I mean, you think of this Andy Sidaris movies. He had people come back and play, different characters, same actor playing. I mean, Rodrigo Obregon played how many different people in those movies, and everybody enjoys them. Everybody loved them. So yeah, I wonder if that's what it was maybe he, his wedding or something like that. He couldn't do the film.
Yeah, possibly. I think we'll never know really, but Billy Drago was also very much in demand at that time as a bad guy, so it might have been that they just decided, we want to get him in to play the villain.
Yeah, they could have thought they were upgrading it, perhaps, that they were they're upgrading the baddie there by having him do it instead. Which, yeah, Billy Drago's always been one for me that, like, he's always been like a little bit too gross for me to enjoy him as a baddie. I think I think I need a little bit more of a slickness to my baddie, like what Norton can bring to the table. I think I think Billy Drago's been a little bit too much for me to enjoy him as a bad guy sometimes.
He just looked so villainous. So I mean, I can't think of a time when he wasn't playing the villain. It just wouldn't seem right, him not playing a villain. He just had that natural look.
Yeah, and maybe that's what it was. Maybe they just thought, okay, well, let's get Drago in here, and we won't cast Norton again, because he was there. He was doing the other Rage and Honor film, actually, than 93. So actually, maybe he was just doing too much other stuff. Maybe he was doing. I know he had City Hunter also come out that year, so maybe that's what it was. Maybe he just didn't have time. I mean, somehow he managed to get married and do all those movies at the same time, because he had a bunch of things come out in 94 as well. So he's, I can only imagine that wedding was probably a really quick and, quick week-long honeymoon. I think I remember him talking with Rothrock about that there was something that possibly may have come. There's an episode on her podcast her YouTube channel where she chats with him about their careers. They talk more about their Hong Kong days than they do anything. And they talk about, like, I think there's one where she injured her knee and had to do the whole movie, and they had to do a fight scene together where he knew she'd injured her knee, so he had to sort of, pick up the slack on some of the parts that she couldn't do. And that kind of thing. So they're telling more of those stories. It's possible that maybe there aren't as many interesting things about behind the scenes about these sort of 90s direct-to-video movies that weren't made in Hong Kong.
Certainly, yeah. I know the whole process of Hong Kong films was kind of very, I guess, insane. sometimes a bit crazy. So yeah, I can imagine there's definitely a lot of stories. Everyone, particularly from the West, who's ever kind of gone over there, always seems to have a story or two about being on set on these films.
Yeah. So maybe that's what it is. Maybe that
Yeah.
We're looking for some interesting stories behind Lady Dragon when maybe it was just as simple as we got to bang these out and okay, well, we're gonna make a sequel. Yeah, Norton's not around for the sequel, so we'll just bring in Billy Drago and do the same thing again. Well, yeah. At this point, Tom, we'll start to wrap up here. Is there anything else about Cynthia Rothrock that you wanted to mention while we're chatting about her?
I just think, yeah, it would be nice to see her get, a bit more of a comeback. I've always been a little bit surprised that she hasn't been asked to board kind of like the Expendables franchise in any way. There's so many of these kind of nostalgic comebacks that it would be nice that she was kind of brought on board, something like that.
Yeah, because it was for some reason I can't think of Ronda Rousey that he used in the third Expendables movie. And you're right. It's kind of, it would have been nice to have her there. And I think too, I mean, I don't know if there's a fear. I mean, I wonder with Stallone, you never know with him. But I wonder if because he could have just not shot any scenes with Rothrock, but I wonder if he was afraid that like, if he stood next to Rothrock, everybody would know how short he is. And maybe he's, because I do think that those are things that he's maybe self-conscious of. I mean, I don't know why he wouldn't have asked her to be a part of the films, but maybe I'm being too hard on him by saying that part. But yeah, I agree with you with the names that they had in there. A Rothrock would have been great. I remember hearing though that Gary Daniels also wasn't originally supposed to be in the first Expendables, and he kind of got on board in this smaller role. And then I guess like some of the ideas that he was throwing out there with Eric Roberts, they pitched them to Stallone, and he actually liked what he was saying, and that's how his role got beefed up a little bit more. So, I think I took for granted that, of course you'd have Gary Daniels in this movie. Why wouldn't you? But actually that wasn't always the case, that he wasn't supposed to be in the film originally, but also not to have the part that he ended up having.
Yeah, I think that was the case, really. I mean, he was essentially a stuntman initially. And yeah, his role got fleshed out a little bit. But I mean, the same thing happened with Mark Dacascos in John Wick 3. So he was going to come on board in a smaller role, and then the guy who was going to be playing the main villain dropped out, and then kind of last minute, Dacascos he's offered the role, he takes it, because obviously you'd want to take it.
Yeah.
And he kind of flies out, to go straight into the film, kind of launch himself into it as the lead villain.
Yeah, which is amazing to think about that. And I mean, I think Dacascos is another one like that, right? That we talk about, who like, he's going to be in this film adaptation of a big video game that ends up not taking off, and then he does Crying Freeman, doesn't get released in theaters in the United States, and I think I don't know if it got released anywhere outside of France in the theater, and it ends up not working out for him. And it's it's kind of a similar situation there. I mean, I know Rothrock did Mercenaries, the Asylum female version of Expendables, which is also more like a Dirty Dozen. I think they tried to sell it as Expendables. It was more of a Dirty Dozen type movie. I think it could be really interesting to see an Expendables, like a direct-to-video Expendables with some of those names. I mean, Don the Dragon, Rothrock, Olivier Gruner, perhaps.
I mean, they had rumors at one point, didn't they? A film called The B Team.
Yeah.
Which I think has ended up just being made into a mobile game. But at one point they were discussing kind of doing a movie in that kind of in the Expendables vein.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be a lot of fun with some of those names, and I mean, how many would you need to have? 4 or 5 maybe at the most. I mean, I mean, if you could pull that together, I think just think about Rothrock and Wilson together, and then maybe Gruner, maybe Daniel Bernhardt, some of those names. I think you could put those together and have something really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I think there would be enough of an audience, to put something like that together, and even just releasing on a streaming platform. I think there's enough popularity in those kind of people to do that. even Tubi are making originals now, so going the kind of making something for AVOD could even be something that would work as well.
Yeah, I think it would be perfect. It's just, I guess it's just a matter of getting it together, and or for people having the want for it, or to put it together. But it is almost kind of surprising, right? Like you said, I guess they had an idea for it and it didn't end up working out. And they ended up making a video game out of it instead. But I think they could even do it in a way that's like maybe not so much biting on the Expendables, but more just like, okay, let's put this crew together and have them go out and solve some kind of mission or something like that. I think, yeah, it could be a lot of fun with maybe Eric Roberts again as the baddie. It's not like he's not available to play the bad guy.
Exactly, yeah. And I guess, if you have to follow that kind of formula that everyone's doing, where you'll get a certain star in for sort of 2 or 3 days or 3 or 4 days, you can kind of do it that way as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you wonder too with some of them, like Rothrock and Don the Dragon, if with them starting to maybe move behind the camera, if maybe one of them wants to direct that kind of movie. I mean, DeCascos directed Showdown in Manila, the Nevsky movie. So
Yeah.
you wonder if maybe one of them comes forward and says, "Okay, I'm going to put this thing together, and who's with me," and they get the names together and they make it happen. I mean, someone like a Dudikoff maybe even too, bring him back. I think that could be really fun.
Yeah, for sure. I think there would be an audience there for it, because there's a lot of nostalgia and there's a lot of warmth that goes towards these old kind of straight to video movies of that era. Because I think they do hold up well now in comparison to maybe quite a few of the more recent ones in the last sort of 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think just talking about Lady Dragon, like you talk about with the locations in particular, but also I think a movie shot on film in a location like that definitely has a look to it that's a little bit different from sort of the digital approach now, where sort of everything's run through the filter and it
Yeah.
I mean, it works in some cases, right? I think there are a lot of modern movies where you can get it to work and it works well, and it does exactly what you need it to do. But some of the nostalgia for these action movies, I think I always think about that kind of thing, like you were talking about with Lady Dragon. It's like it was nice to just see Indonesia there and see that as a location. And yes, it's probably much more expensive to shoot it on film than it is to put it in digital, run it through the filter so that the lighting is the same throughout the film. But it is kind of nice to see it like that too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even back in sort of the early 90s, they would spend it back then. It would look like a small amount, but they would spend a reasonable amount on making these films. Whereas the actual budget for a lot of the films that are equivalent these days are under $1 million. So
Right.
yeah, and maybe shooting in half the time.
Yeah, and maybe that's the problem for this sort of DTV Expendables, is like it's maybe the issue is getting the money for them to do it, where getting all if only one of those names is in the movie, you pay that one name the money for the few days of shooting, but is it feasible to pay 4 of those names that money for the short amount? So maybe that's part of the sticking point with getting that movie made. Whereas from the Expendables standpoint, you've got these names that were all big screen stars at one time who have this mindset of, if we're going to get a movie on the big screen, we've all got to be in it together, because one of us isn't enough to get the name recognition to get on the big screen. It's a little bit of a different dynamic there than it is with the direct-to-video stars.
Yeah, definitely. And it's in that level of, there's a big difference between the kind of the sub $10 million movies and 60, $80 million movies that the Expendables fell into. So yeah, that kind of middle ground is a difficult place to find, really.
Yeah, so I guess it's a matter of, with kind of the modern environment. If I think what would have to happen is probably all of the stars involved would have to be willing to take a haircut and do it more to get their names out there than to. But again, how do you tell someone like, oh, you're going to be working for just to get your name out there, when there's somebody else offering you actual money that you could use to sort of keep supplementing your lifestyle. It's probably a difficult call.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's where if there's one or two of them that are kind of a driving force behind making it. So I know at one point with the B team, Don Wilson was kind of like the forerunner of it. He was the one who was kind of the most vocal about making it. So whether he was going to produce it or have a direct influence in the film, I don't know. But I think it probably needs that, because they all kind of know each other. They've all worked together at some point or another. So it might be a case of two of them coming together and saying, let's make this film, and then we'll get our mates in to do it with us.
Yeah, so hopefully, maybe if any of them are listening to us talk about this here, then hey, there's a market out there. We know a lot of people that would want to watch it. So
yeah, I mean, I'll write it if they want. So
yes, there we go.
Cool.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Yeah, if you write it and then kind of start shipping it out or like shopping it. Like, hey, what do you think of this? And kind of see it's interesting because talking with Jonathan Southcott, who had Nemesis, he's got kind of a stable of actors, and Daniel Zarilli has a stable of actors, and then they say Art Camacho, he kind of he works with like Wilson and Rothrock Moore, and he has a few other names that he works with. It's kind of like if one of those names kind of just says, hey, let's like maybe that's what it is. It's going to take some kind of element from one of those producers to sort of start pulling the names together and saying, hey, do we think we can do this? But all of them seem to also have a lot of other projects going on, especially like Zarilli. It seems like he's just always got like 5 things going on at once or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's difficult to find time sometimes, and these things can develop for years and then you just never quite get off the ground.
Yeah,
which I think probably is what happened with the B team, that they had interest and then it never quite materialized into money coming in to shoot it, or trying to find that moment where you can get 7 or 8 people together to shoot the film.
Yeah, so that's that's probably some challenges there. Maybe we need to shrink the cast down to like 3 or 4 of them and see if we can pick any 4 out of like 7 or 8 if they can make it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how we have to do it. All right, excellent. Well, Tom, we're about to wrap up here. Is there anything that you wanted to plug while we're finishing up here?
Yeah, just I guess I'll plug When Darkness Falls again. So that will hopefully be out in a few more territories before the end of the year, going into next year. And then next January, Renegades is coming out in the UK. So that'll be January 30th. And then US should be similar kind of time. So that will be confirmed soon. But yeah, those 2 particularly.
Excellent. Yeah, and I should also remind people too that they should check out Flickering Myth for your articles, because I think they're I think they encapsulate a lot of what it's like to be a film, someone who's watched movies from like the 80s and 90s to now. It feels like you put a lot of modern trends in a really great context that for me especially, I kind of sometimes don't think about those movies the ways that you bring them up, but I think it's a really great I think for anybody who's into action movies, and especially the kinds that we talk about, your Flickering Myth articles are also great to talk about, or great to check out.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks very much. It's good to know someone's reading them anyway.
Yes, no, I definitely enjoy them. But for sure, just reiterating, When Darkness Falls, I think, when this podcast drops, if it's in more locations, I think everybody should really check that one out. And Renegades, I posted my Nemesis review just earlier, and Jonathan Tuck, he kind of mentioned, he liked it. I enjoyed the movie, and I was like, well, if Nemesis is any indication, I'm excited for what Renegades has in store. And he's like, yeah, you're not going to be disappointed with Renegades.
Well, I definitely hope so. I'm really looking forward to it myself. And then, hope possibly before the end of the year, I've got another one coming or going to camera with Jonathan. So hopefully at the end of the year, we're going to be shooting Crackdown.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So that's definitely another kind of old school action film that kind of harkens back to Cannon and PM and things like that.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that. I think on the website it lists that one as, I think it's got the 3 films. It's got Nemesis, Renegades, and Crackdown. I think sort of on the Shogun Films website.
Yeah, yeah. I think Jonathan's also shooting a film called Crossfire, which is kind of Die Hard in a mall, and that'll be another good one as well.
Oh, that's the one. Okay, Crossfire is the one. I think I got my C titles mixed up there.
Okay,
That's
yeah,
the one that's on the website.
yeah.
It's Crossfire.
So
Okay.
that's kind of next in line, and it's Crackdown right after. So hopefully, both of those will shoot before the end of the year.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think we talked about Nemesis the last time you were on, and I think that I really liked what that. I think we were both talking about how you really like what that movie did with home invasion kind of movies, with gangster films. That a lot of the differences there. And then I think when you were on last time, we were talking about some of the things with Renegades, like some of the stars who are going to be in that, guys like Danny Trejo as well. So yeah, exciting stuff. I'm after seeing Nemesis, I'm excited. I think companies like Shogun Films that are kind of more of an indie style, that are sort of doing things a little bit less, kind of outside of the sort of the main studio system. It's kind of cool to kind of see what can be done with those kinds of movies, even with limited budgets and things like that, to see sort of some of the different things that are being done.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also, Jonathan and Daniel, they really want to make good films as well, as much as anything. They don't just want to churn something out. They want to make something that's going to really kind of impress people and, really kind of please old school action fans.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely evident in Nemesis, where it's like the performance is in there. I think we talked about Billy Murray's character when he sets the
Yeah.
car on fire that has the bad guy in it. He's just sort of laughing maniacally. But I mean, there were other elements to that he had. And then we talked about Janine Narissa Southcott's performance, where she kind of
Yeah,
took
she's fantastic in that. Yeah.
Yeah, and she really liked that. We kind of highlighted that, but a lot of that was what you and me just talking about, like sort of how she takes the traditional gangster's wife and gives it more grit and edge that I think the film needed. And I mean, Nick Moran's performance was just fantastic. I think that was one a lot of people were really keying in on, was his, which I think was great. But I think a lot of great performances there. But I think also from a story standpoint, like sort of creating those characters, and from a director standpoint, to sort of let the actors do what they're doing there, and not not sort of overdo it, in terms of the way that it wasn't heavy-handed, I guess I could say, with that. And so yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I'm excited for Renegades. I'm excited to see what comes next.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, me too. I mean, as much as anything, even though I wrote it, as a fan of the genre, I'm just really kind of looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, it should be a really good one. And I think it's interesting in your case, because you've got kind of those two. When Darkness Falls is a very different kind of project to Renegades. But I still think for people listening, it's definitely worth a watch. And of course, we have the podcast episode that we did where there's much more behind the scenes talk about it.
Yeah, it's just another one. It's one of those kind of old school films that I liked. The kind of early 90s pot boilers. I really kind of was into those films, those kind of thrillers. So yeah, that was another one that was, one to tick off my list.
Yeah, that one definitely works in that vein. I think that it definitely has the kind of the slow burn, as we talked about. And I think for me, I'm used to these high octane actioners, so I'm used to, we're talking about these two movies, Lady Dragon and China O'Brien, where it's like, fight scenes right from the beginning, and just sort of every 10 minutes you're getting a good fight scene. I think my brain is kind of used to those, but I think, switching gears and sort of changing that mindset, if you let the movie, like I think in a movie like yours, like When Darkness Falls, trusting that the payoff is going to be there, that it's going to have the slow boil, the payoff is really fantastic, and it's really worth trusting the process there.
Yeah, well, that was our intention, and making the locations a kind of another character in the film.
Yeah.
That's a key part of really having that kind of slow burn and involving the audiences to make the locations feel like another character in the film.
Yeah, and I think the way we talk about the way you use the Scottish Highlands as both open and expansive, but then also claustrophobic, that combination, that duality there played really well in both the daylight scenes and the nighttime scenes.
Yeah, I mean, we really set out to do that, and the sort of final act where you're getting a few twists and turns. That's the element that kind of harks back to all those films that were coming out in the early '90s, where there would always be like a thriller when there'd be twists and turns, and we were kind of into that in a big way. Myself and Nathan, the director.
Yeah, that's a good point. There were so many of those movies in the '90s that worked, and it was almost like there was a market for them. And there's a lot of, almost every actor you can think of did one of those movies. I mean, even guys like Jim Belushi were doing them, and it was one of those things that you could always pop one of those on, either rent it, or find it on cable or something. And it was always good for a nice like evening watch. And I think that's kind of where When Darkness Falls comes in. I think it's a really great like Saturday night watch for people just staying in and looking for a movie.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. So I hope we have another boost on it when it's more widely available on AVOD.
Yeah, I think when this podcast airing is probably going to coincide with, at least in the United States, it sounds like from the timeline you're talking about, it should be available on more streaming services by the time. I think when I put the podcast out, I'll probably take a look and see, and I can always put links in the description and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're hopefully by then, we're looking at early September, I believe, at Tubi and Peacock. So those are going to be two big platforms for us, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's about when this episode's going to be aired. So, like, people that are listening to it now, it's probably early September as you're listening. So, so hopefully that'll be the case then. All right, excellent. Well, Tom, thank you again for coming on. This was a really great conversation, and especially Cynthia Rothrock. She's one that I think on the podcast we haven't talked about her as much. So it was really great to kind of really get stuck in and discuss her career, but also talk about some of the projects that you've got coming up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've had a good time. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you as well. And again, as we're wrapping up When Darkness Falls on Amazon Prime here in the United States. Also, you can get it on DVD as well. And then, we're thinking, as you're listening, it's probably also, Tubi, other streaming platforms as well. All right. Thank you again, Tom. It was great having you on, and thank you everybody for listening. Talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.